Chapter 1772. Origin Stone. The Blood Immortal was silent for a moment, as if she was hesitating. Finally, she clenched her teeth and said, "Master, I still have 1/3 of the blood whale. This blood whale has enough blood energy to trade for the scarlet skulls." As she spoke, the Blood Immortal took out 1/3 of the blood whale. This blood whale was huge, about 100 feet in size. Once it was taken out, it took up half of the room. Shui and Elder Ju quickly hid on the side and stared at the blood whale in horror. As soon as the blood whale appeared, a monstrous blood energy immediately spread throughout the room. Even the 3rd floor was filled with this blood energy. It actually suppressed the scarlet light of the scarlet skulls. Zhuowen squinted his eyes and sneered. It seemed that the Blood Immortal had hidden a lot of things for herself. However, he didn't plan to pursue this matter. After all, he did promise to leave the rest of the blood whale to her. How she wanted to deal with it was up to her. The instant this blood energy soared into the sky, a man with several bloody scars on his face in a private room not far away had a blood glow erupt from his eyes. Immediately, he took a step forward and instantly disappeared from the private room, arriving in front of Zhuo Wen's private room. "It seems that you have a treasure that can increase blood energy. Would you like to trade with me?" Kong Haoqian's eyes were burning. Zhuowen looked at Kong Haoqian through the room and sneered. This Kong Haoqian was no stranger to Zhuowen. He was the man with messy hair that he met at the entrance of the Crystal Tower. "Sure. However, I need 20 of those blood-colored skulls," Zhuowen said slowly. Kong Haoqian's pupils shrank and his face darkened. He said coldly, "Friend, your item is indeed rich in blood energy, but it's not worth 20 scarlet skulls, is it?" Zhuowen sneered and said, "If that's the case, then please go back." Kong Haoqian frowned. He had a strong desire for items that could increase blood energy. It was also very beneficial for his cultivation. Now that he finally encountered it, how could he give it up? 20 it is. I have 19 here. Adding the 20 on the auction stage, we can trade now. Kong Haoqian said. "Awesome." Zhuowen laughed and waved his sleeve. He lifted the blood whale and threw it at Kong Haoqian. Kong Haoqian's eyes were cold as he threw the 19 blood-red skulls in his hand. After putting away the part of the blood whale, Kong Haogan's eyes carried a hint of heat. He immediately returned to his private room without looking back. Zhuowen gave the 19 scarlet skulls he obtained to the Blood Immortal in the spirit ring. As for the remaining scarlet skull, the old man at the auction would arrange for a maid to send it to his room later. The transaction of the bloody skull was not shocking. Although this item was not ordinary, it was of little value to most warriors. Only the right people would treat it as a treasure, just like the Blood Immortal. After that, the auction proceeded slowly. There were earthly immortal saint artifacts, precious spirit pills, formidable immortal arts, and so on and so forth, and it could be said that there were all sorts of treasures. The auction became more and more heated, and the sound of bidding rang out in the private room. Zhuowen, on the other hand, was unperturbed. He had no intention of joining the fight. Zhuowen did not lack any earthly immortal sacred artifacts or powerful immortal skills. Moreover, the 3 immortal skills that he possessed were definitely the best among all the immortal skills. As for the other ordinary immortal skills, he was not interested in them at all. This item was obtained by an old celestial immortal friend of mine in an ancient relic in the primordial battlefield. Although I don't recognize it, since it came from an ancient relic, it must be extremely powerful. Everyone can bid for it. Suddenly, the old man's voice became low. Then, a maid slowly walked out from behind the curtain. She was holding a square plate with both hands. On the square plate, there was a black stone the size of a palm lying quietly. Everyone in the private room became interested. Since it could be obtained from an ancient relic, this item must be special. "Can you introduce the use of this stone?" Someone asked curiously. The auctioneer fell silent for a moment, and then he revealed a wisp of embarrassment and said, "I don't know what the use of this stone is. That old friend of mine only felt that this stone was extraordinary, but he didn't know its specific use. That's why he put it here for auction." As soon as these words were spoken, it instantly caused a flurry of discussion in the crowd, and they revealed strange gazes. Since the auctioneer did not even know the use of this stone, why would he put it up for auction? Wasn't this a scam? The auctioneer coughed dryly, and then he said in a low voice, "Let the bidding begin. The starting price of this stone is 10,000 immortal crystals." As soon as he finished speaking, the surroundings became deathly silent. No one spoke up at all. They were not idiots. It was impossible for them to spend 10,000 immortal crystals to buy a stone of unknown use. At this moment, Zhuowen's expression changed slightly when he saw the stone in the private room, and his heart couldn't help but thump wildly. On the other hand, Zhuowen's sea of consciousness was in a mess. The Fuxi cauldron that originally stood silently in his golden sea of consciousness was actually buzzing at this moment. It caused huge waves to surge within his golden sea of consciousness, and it wanted to break out of his sea of consciousness. Cheng Huang and Xiao He shot out explosively and firmly suppressed the restless Fuxi cauldron. If it weren't for the two of them suppressing it, the Fuxi cauldron would have probably transformed into a black ray of light that shot out from between Zhuowen's brows and charged towards the stone on the auction platform. It was the first time in Zhuowen's life that the Fuxi cauldron was actually so agitated. After all, the Fuxi cauldron was usually completely silent. "What's going on?" Zhuowen asked solemnly. Cheng Huang's eyes flickered. He suppressed his excitement and said, "That's the Stone of Origin. It's the most primitive stone that was formed when the Heavenly Armor continent was formed. Back then, Master used the Stone of Origin as a raw material to refine the Fuxi cauldron. If we have this, the Fuxi cauldron will be able to recover significantly." Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He had never imagined that the stone would actually be a material to refine the Fuxi cauldron. No wonder the Fuxi cauldron was so agitated. After all, the Fuxi cauldron had been refined by the strongest expert of the continent, Songjia. If it had been complete, its might would have been extremely vast and terrifying. However, it was too damaged right now, so its use was too limited. If the Stone of Origin could restore the Fuxi cauldron, then perhaps the Fuxi cauldron that was originally of little value to him might become extremely useful. Zhuowen's heart surged with excitement when he thought of that. He said to Cheng Huang and Xiao He, "Suppress the Fuxi cauldron. I will obtain the Stone of Origin." With that, Zhuowen's consciousness emerged from his sea of consciousness and landed on the auction stage, where the old man was feeling awkward and helpless. The old auctioneer looked around and discovered that no one was bidding. He knew that the strange stone was just too useless. There was probably no one who would be willing to be a sucker for it. Since no one is bidding, then this item will be taken away for now. Let's move on to the next item. The old auctioneer waved his hand, intending to dismiss the maidservant who was holding the item. "This stone is quite interesting. I'll bid 10,000 celestial crystals for it." Suddenly, a calm voice rang out, attracting the attention of everyone in the box. When they realized that the voice came from Zhuowen's box, they revealed strange expressions. Everyone knew who the owner of the room was. It was Zhuowen, who had a conflict with He Wushang. What no one expected was that Zhuowen would actually be a sucker for this stone that no one was interested in. This made many people sigh inwardly at his ignorance and fearlessness. "How Bo, do you recognize the origin of this stone?" In the box next to Zhuowen's, Yuan Hongwen looked over and asked the middle-aged man beside him. The middle-aged man's gaze was cold. He glanced at the stone on the auction stage and shook his head without saying a word. "Young Master Yuan, do you suspect that this stone is unusual?" Ji Chenyan asked curiously in the box. Yuan Hongwen smiled at Ji Chenyan and said, "I don't recognize it. However, since Zhuowen is auctioning this stone, I'm sure it's not just because it's interesting, right?" Ji Chenyan narrowed her eyes and smiled. "It seems that young Master Yuan is interested in young Master Zhua. Could it be that the two of you know each other?" Yuan Hongwen smiled and said, "I don't know him. However, I know that he's interesting, so..." At this point, Yuan Hongwen called out loudly, 15,000 immortal crystals. The moment Yuan Hongwen called out his bid, the surrounding boxes went into an uproar. It was fine if Zhuowen was being stupid, but could it be that Yuan Hongwen was being stupid as well? He actually called out his bid. In the box, Zhuowen frowned slightly. He looked coldly at the box next to his and said after a moment of silence, 20,000 immortal crystals. At this moment, the auctioneer was ecstatic. He didn't have much hope for this stone, but there was actually someone bidding for it. Moreover, the price had doubled in an instant. 25,000 immortal crystals. Yuan Hongwen said unhurriedly. Zhuowen's face grew darker and darker. He directly called out 30,000 immortal crystals, causing the surrounding atmosphere to become a little strange. Yuan Hongwen narrowed his eyes and smiled. However, isn't this stone really interesting? It shouldn't be worth 30,000 immortal crystals, right? Brother, you're really bold. I'll let you have this stone. With that, Yuan Hongwen stopped bidding. However, Zhuowen's eyes were gloomy. He was puzzled as to what Yuan Hongwen was trying to do. The auctioneer's face was radiant. He smiled and said, 30,000 immortal crystals. Is there anyone else who wants to continue bidding? If there's no one else, this stone belongs to this young friend. As soon as he said that, the surrounding area remained silent. Obviously, no one was willing to be a sucker. After the deal was finalized, Zhuowen let out a sigh of relief. This stone wasn't very useful to others, but to him it was very useful. After all, it was a material that could restore the Fuxi cauldron. After this interlude, the auction continued, and the maidservant delivered the stone to Zhuowen's private room. Chapter 1773. Immortal Tribulation. Zhuowen took a deep breath and pinched the sword fingers on his right hand. Immediately, he pressed the stone of origin deep into his glabella. The Fuxi cauldron blasted away Xiaohe and Cheng Huang's obstruction the instant the origin stone entered the golden sea of consciousness. It swept towards the origin stone and sucked it into the cauldron. Buzz buzz buzz. The moment the Fuxi cauldron sucked in the origin stone, it emitted a rather intense buzzing sound. Then, it slowly quieted down and numerous ink-black rays of light twinkled around the cauldron. Zhuowen silently observed the Fuxi cauldron's transformation. He knew that the Fuxi cauldron was relying on the origin energy from the origin stone to silently recover its condition. Speaking of which, Zhuowen was quite eager to see how much the Fuxi cauldron could recover. After retracting his gaze, the auction on the stage continued. Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu also made a few bids, but unfortunately, they did not have enough immortal crystals. Hence, they could only end up dejectedly. The following auction items became more and more valuable. Most of them would easily cost more than 100,000 immortal crystals. Even Zhuowen could not fork out such a huge amount of immortal crystals. Hence, after watching for a while, Zhuowen lost interest. Even though some of the following items were rather tempting, it was a pity that he did not have 100,000 immortal crystals on him. It was simply not enough to participate in the following auctions. Hence, Zhuowen left the box with Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu, intending to leave this place. After exiting the box, Ji Chunyan also walked out from next door. The two of them coincidentally bumped into each other. Ji Chunyan sized up Zhuowen with her beautiful eyes and smiled. Young Master Zhuo, are you leaving the auction? Zhuowen nodded and said, there shouldn't be a rule prohibiting us from leaving halfway, right? Ji Chunyan smiled sweetly. Of course there isn't such a rule. If young Master Zhuo wishes to leave, please follow me. I will bring you out. Hearing this, Zhuowen did not refuse. Following Ji Chunyan's lead, he left the crystal tower. Master Zhou, he asked me to pass on a message. He hopes that young Master Zhuo will visit him more often in the future when you have the time. Ji Chunyan whispered to Zhuowen as they walked out of the crystal tower. Zhuowen nodded and said, I understand. I'll take my leave now. Zhuowen cupped his fists towards Ji Chunyan and left the crystal tower. Ji Chunyan silently looked at the departing figure as her beautiful eyes flickered. She couldn't understand why Grandmaster Zhou would treat Zhuowen so well. Of course, if Ji Chunyan knew that Zhuowen had a complete set of ancient forbidden arts, he wouldn't think so. After leaving the crystal tower, Zhuowen, Xue Hui, and Old Man Zhushang strolled around the celestial market for a while. Xue Hui and Old Man Zhushang traded for treasures that they were satisfied with before leaving the celestial market with Zhuowen. After returning to his residence, Zhuowen immediately closed the palace door and set up an extremely powerful defensive barrier inside the palace. After doing all this, he took out the violet infant leaf that looked like a baby from his spirit ring. This violet infant leaf has the miraculous effect of harmonizing yin and yang. When the yin and yang energy is combined with this violet infant leaf, I'm afraid that it will approach perfection. Then I can safely absorb the yin and yang energy. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he took out the yin and yang energy from his spirit ring. He slowly poured the yin and yang energy into the violet infant leaf. Then Zhuowen realized that the violet infant leaf actually let out a rare cry of a baby. As the yin and yang energy continued to pour in, the cry became louder and louder. The surface of the violet infant leaf emitted an extremely blazing purple light. Moreover, Zhuowen could clearly feel that the moment the yin and yang energy entered the violet infant leaf, its originally incomplete flaws were constantly being perfected under the effect of the yin and yang energy of the violet infant leaf. When the purple light on the surface of the violet infant leaf reached its peak, the cry of the baby gradually subsided and finally disappeared. The yin and yang energy also completely entered the violet infant leaf. At this moment, the violet infant leaf did not look like a leaf at all. Instead, it looked more like a newborn baby. Its entire body was filled with vitality. This violet infant leaf has absorbed the yin and yang energy. I'm afraid that it has an unimaginable miraculous effect of increasing celestial yuan. It should be more than enough to help you advance to the earthly immortal realm, Xiao He said indifferently in his sea of consciousness. Zhuowen nodded. Then he waved his sleeve and separated his mental energy doppelganger. At the same time, he handed the tattered bamboo scroll that recorded the exquisite restriction, and the yellow crystal that Zhou Yi had given him to his mental energy doppelganger. The yellow crystal contained Zhou Yi's lifetime of experience in the cultivation of mental power, while the bamboo scroll recorded the famous ancient taboo, the exquisite taboo. Zhuowen was prepared to let his mental energy doppelganger comprehend these two things. Perhaps his mental energy doppelganger would be able to use this period of time to study the exquisite restriction and completely cultivate the devouring curse restriction to greater completion. After doing that, Zhuowen grabbed the violet infant leaf with his right hand and placed it between his eyebrows. Immediately, dense yin and yang energy flowed into Zhuowen's body from between his eyebrows. After circulating through his meridians, it completely gathered into Zhuowen's dantian. Moreover, after entering his dantian, the yin and yang energy formed a vortex. Strangely, extremely dense celestial yuan surged out from the vortex and began to accumulate in his dantian. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as he sensed the surging celestial yuan from the violet infant leaf. He began to concentrate on refining the surging celestial yuan. Time gradually passed. Half a month had passed. On this day, Shiji slowly opened his eyes in the secret room. Then he seemed to have sensed something and could not help but look in the direction of the room next door. He said in a deep voice, "This aura is Zhuowen?" After speaking, Shiji suddenly stood up and disappeared from the secret room. When he reappeared, he was already outside Zhuowen's pavilion. He saw that there were extremely strange and powerful fluctuations around Zhuowen's pavilion. As the fluctuations grew stronger, clusters of 7-colored auspicious clouds began to gather in the sky above the pavilion. Immortal tribulation? Is this kid about to break through? Shiji raised his head and looked at the 7-colored auspicious clouds that had begun to gather in the sky. A strange expression appeared in his eyes. It was not just Shiji. Many experts at the earthly immortal realm and above in the surroundings had spread their souls over. They began to investigate the exact situation. In particular, when they discovered the 7-colored auspicious clouds that had begun to gather in the sky, it caused waves of commotion and surprise. Powerful souls entered Zhuowen's pavilion one after another in an attempt to investigate the exact situation in the depths of the pavilion. However, all of them were swept away by Shiji with a sweep of his sleeve. If anyone dares to disturb Zhuowen's breakthrough by using their souls to investigate, then don't blame me for holding them accountable. Shiji coldly snorted. Wherever the sound wave passed, a series of circular ripples surged in the air. Many divine senses were forced back by Shiji, not daring to approach the loft where Zhuowen was. Moreover, Shiji's reputation had already been established in the matter of the Master of Taiying. Hence, after receiving Shiji's warning, many of the owners of souls withdrew their souls and did not dare to continue investigating. More and more 7-colored auspicious clouds gathered. At this moment, Zhuowen sat cross-legged on a cushion in the depths of the pavilion. The purple light from the violet infant leaf between his brows was extremely dim. The originally strange purple color had completely vanished. However, the aura on Zhuowen's body was like a ferocious beast. It surged more and became more and more terrifying. The aura was so terrifying that it practically shot into the sky. It was as if the sky was about to collapse because of it. Zhuowen abruptly opened his eyes. The violet infant leaf between his eyebrows began to crumble, turning into purple powder. His eyes were exceptionally bright at this moment. The immortal tribulation has descended, Zhuowen murmured softly. Then he took a step forward and appeared outside the pavilion. He glanced at Shiji, who was not far away. After nodding at him, his gaze landed on the 7-colored auspicious clouds in the sky that were constantly gathering 7-colored lightning tribulation. The 7-colored lightning tribulation is no longer as threatening to me as it was in the past. Zhuowen licked his lips. Then he kicked the air with his right foot. His entire body shot towards the 7-colored auspicious clouds in the sky like a shuttle. Shiji could not help but narrow his eyes when he saw this scene. The other cultivators who were still watching in the surroundings all exclaimed in surprise. This kid is actually planning to charge into the 7-colored auspicious clouds. Is he courting death? This kid is crazy. The 7-colored lightning tribulation should be treated with caution. Instead, this kid is directly charging in recklessly. He's a little too arrogant. Many cultivators discussed animatedly. There were even some who sneered. However, Shiji frowned slightly. He did not stop Zhuowen's seemingly foolish actions. He knew very well that with Zhuowen's character he would not seek his own death. It seems that this kid is very confident in the 7-colored lightning tribulation. Forget it. If this kid can't withstand it, I can only help him, Shiji thought to himself. Rumble. When Zhuowen approached the 7-colored auspicious clouds in the sky, countless 7-colored lightning tribulations emerged from the 7-colored auspicious clouds. The 7-colored lightning tribulations were densely packed and began to gather into countless thunderbolts. Then they suddenly struck down and blasted in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. Then his entire body began to glow with a dark gold color. The dark gold color became more and more vigorous. Then 9 strange golden runes appeared. The 9 golden runes floated around Zhuowen's body. They began to rotate in an extremely orderly manner, forming a powerful golden defense. Since Zhuowen's divine body had been promoted to the perfection realm, the first mountain god had also promoted the 9-turn golden crack rune in the divine body to the peak. Originally, the divine body could only display 3 9-turn golden crack runes. However, Zhuowen could display 9 9-turn golden crack runes now. The defense formed by the runes was so strong that it was enough to defend against an all-out attack from a peak earthly immortal realm warrior. Bang! 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 Chapter 1774. Central Divine Palace. The 7-colored lightning tribulation was indeed terrifying. Any half-immortal would have been blasted into smithereens by this attack. However, Zhuowen, who had the 9-turn golden split rune, was unscathed. The collision between the 7-colored lightning tribulation and the 9-turn golden split rune created a terrifying lightning radiance. However, Zhuowen's body only paused for a moment before he rushed into the 7-colored auspicious clouds. He rushed in? The 7-colored lightning tribulation didn't seem to have much of an effect on him. Many warriors were stunned by this scene. These earthly immortals and heavenly immortals knew how terrifying the 7-colored lightning tribulation was when they had advanced to the earthly immortal realm. If they were careless, they might be killed. However, Zhuowen was so abnormal that he was not afraid of the terrifying 7-colored lightning tribulation at all. He directly entered the 7-colored tribulation clouds. In his opinion, this was simply an act of seeking death. Regardless of the surrounding discussions, Zhuowen encountered an unimaginable resistance after entering the 7-colored auspicious clouds. The tribulation lightning in the 7-colored auspicious clouds was too dense, much denser than the lightning in the outside world. As soon as Zhuowen entered, he felt that it was difficult to move. Moreover, the defense formed by the 9-turn golden split rune was on the verge of collapse under the terrifying tribulation lightning. It was as if it could collapse at any time. With my current perfection saint body, I should be able to withstand the 7-colored lightning tribulation. With the tempering of the 7-colored lightning tribulation, my perfection saint body will be sufficiently stabilized. This way, my foundation won't be unstable. Zhuowen murmured in a low voice. Immediately, his right foot stepped into the dense 7-colored lightning tribulation, and then he walked step by step into the depths of the 7-colored auspicious clouds. There was no doubt that as he went deeper, the 7-colored lightning tribulation in the clouds became more and more terrifying and powerful. The 9-turn golden split rune around Zhuowen also reached its limit. It was on the verge of collapse, and cracks began to appear on its surface. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He snorted coldly and withdrew the 9-turn golden split rune. Instead, he used his perfection saint body to withstand the 7-colored lightning tribulation. Boom. Boom. Countless 7-colored tribulation lightning struck Zhuowen's body, causing Zhuowen's qi and blood to boil. It was a heart-wrenching pain. However, Zhuowen gritted his teeth and activated the indestructible divine body of 10,000 Tao in his body. With his strong body, he started to absorb the rainbow-colored lightning bolts around him. He simply sat cross-legged on the clouds and welcomed the countless rainbow-colored lightning bolts around him. Surrounded by the 7-colored lightning tribulation, Zhuowen seemed to have become a terrifying lightning man. Dense threads of lightning spread all over Zhuowen's body, spreading from top to bottom. At this moment, in the Chaos Temple, many people who were paying attention to the rainbow auspicious clouds looked at each other with strange expressions. Until now, not a single rainbow-colored lightning bolt had struck down from the rainbow auspicious clouds. Instead, terrifying lightning bolts burst out from within the auspicious clouds. They were like rainbow-colored lightning snakes that constantly circled around in the clouds. Without a doubt, this was the strangest way to go through the heavenly tribulation that everyone had ever seen. In all of history, no one had dared to go into the clouds directly during the heavenly tribulation. This was because it was an act of seeking death. Days passed one after another. In the blink of an eye, 5 days had passed. Many people revealed impatient expressions during this period of time. Shiji's eyes, on the other hand, were flickering. Although he was a little worried for Zhuowen in his heart, he was able to tell that Zhuowen, who was within the cloud layer, was fine. Therefore, he did not lend a hand. Rumble. Suddenly, the quiet rainbow auspicious clouds suddenly started to wriggle violently. Then, the rainbow auspicious clouds slowly dissipated into nothingness before everyone's eyes. Amidst the dispersing rainbow-colored auspicious clouds, an imposing figure suddenly fell from the depths of the clouds like a falling meteor. Bang! The figure crashed heavily into the courtyard in front of the pavilion. The terrifying impact caused the ground to tremble violently for tens of thousands of miles. A bottomless pit was formed in the courtyard. At the bottom of the pit, a figure slowly stood up. His upper body was naked and dense rainbow-colored lightning bolts constantly circled around his body. He looked extremely extraordinary. What a powerful physical body. Where did this kid learn such a powerful body refining technique? Shiji narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhuowen, who was in the deep pit. He seemed to be deep in thought. At this moment, countless cyclones began to swirl around Zhuowen. A vast aura slowly surged up from his body, forming an extremely terrifying storm. Zhuowen stood up and suddenly opened his eyes. In his dantian, there was a clear shattering sound. He knew that the source of the shattering sound was the origin core in his dantian. At this moment, the origin core was completely shattered. An extremely surging celestial core power burst out from it. A primordial spirit in the shape of a white ball of light emerged and floated quietly in the center of his dantian. 5 days and 5 nights of tempering by the rainbow tribulation thunder has finally laid the foundation for my physical body to become a perfection saint body. Moreover, my cultivation has also reached the early stage of the earth immortal realm as expected. Zhuowen's eyes burst out with a bright light. Although his cultivation was only at the early stage of the earth immortal realm, with the powerful celestial arts he had mastered, the strange and unpredictable half-step Tao meaning, and the powerful perfection saint body, even an expert at the peak of the earth immortal realm could not defeat him. Senior, thank you for protecting me. Zhuowen clasped his fist at Shiji, who was not far away, with a grateful expression on his face. When he was breaking through previously, it was Shiji who blocked all the divine senses that harbored ill intentions. Shiji's eyes were filled with admiration. He stared at Zhuowen and said, "Your progress is very fast. Being able to advance to the Earth Immortal Realm means that you are completely standing in the ranks of the top experts in the Central Region. I think you have a better chance of winning the divine battle this time, right?" "Zhuowen, this time Dohua has already informed me that the divine battle is scheduled to begin in 2 months. In this short 2 months, you can properly comprehend the Buddha demon transformation. This celestial art should be of great help to you." Shiji took a deep look at Zhuowen and left the attic. 2 months later, Zhuowen did not pay any attention to the divine senses that had gathered around him. After muttering to himself, he entered the attic again. Since there were still 2 months before the divine battle, he could use this time to properly prepare. After Zhuowen had broken through to the Earth Immortal Realm, he would often send his mental strength clone to Zhou Yi's courtyard to ask about mental strength. With the constant guidance, Zhuowen's path to becoming a heavenly saint master became clearer and clearer. Moreover, Zhou Yi would also occasionally explain some of his experiences with the devouring curse. Although Zhou Yi had not cultivated the devouring curse for a long time, he had comprehended the broken exquisite curse for many years after all. He had a unique understanding and perspective of ancient curses, so his cultivation of the devouring curse was extremely fast. Very soon, he had reached minor accomplishment. Even Zhuowen felt ashamed of Zhou Yi's cultivation speed. It was simply godlike. Moreover, after listening to Zhou Yi's explanation, Zhuowen's understanding of the forbidden devouring curse had deepened. It was likely that he was not far from reaching the major completion stage. The news that the divine battle was scheduled to take place in 2 months spread through the entire chaotic divine temple. For a moment, the cultivators who were participating in the divine battle began to get busy. The atmosphere also became even more tense. One day before the divine battle, Zhuowen sat cross-legged in a secret room. He formed a seal with his right hand, and then pointed at the void. Countless curses began to surge out, forming terrifying whirlpools around him. These vortexes were formed from runes, and they contained extremely terrifying destructive power and powerful sealing power. The moment the whirlpools filled the entire room, Zhuowen suddenly stopped. The whirlpools stopped in the air, as if time had stopped. Zhuowen smiled. Strange curses flashed through his eyes. It was not just his eyes. His face, neck, and even his entire body was covered in curses. With a casual wave of his hand, Zhuowen could unleash the terrifying sealing power of curses. Major accomplishment of the devouring curse. Its sealing power really is terrifying. Zhuowen slowly raised his right hand. Immediately, the whirlpools in the surroundings suddenly stopped. Afterward, they all surged into Zhuowen's right hand. The space that had been sealed by the whirlpools immediately became much more lively. Senior Zhou Yi said that it's impossible to reach the soul level without entering the Saint Immortal Realm. I can only rely on Elder Gu of the Primal Chaos Temple to save Chen Shui. Zhuowen couldn't help but think of Mu Chenxue, who was still lying in the crystal coffin. In the past 2 months, Zhuowen often went in and out of Zhou Yi's bamboo grove courtyard. Naturally, the two of them had become familiar with each other. He had mentioned Mu Chenxue to Zhou Yi. Unfortunately, Zhou Yi was powerless. He knew that in the entire Primal Chaos Temple, only Elder Gu could save Mu Chenxue. Of course, it was unknown whether there were other Saint Immortal Masters in the Primal Chaos Temple. First place in the divine battle. Zhuowen leapt out and charged out of the pavilion. He turned into a streak of light and shot towards the central divine hall of the chaotic divine temple. Not only Zhuowen, but all the warriors who were participating in the divine battle also turned into rainbows. Their target was the central palace of the Primal Chaos Temple. Streaks of rainbows gathered in the sky above the Primal Chaos Temple, forming a dazzling radiance. At that moment, it looked magnificent and gorgeous. "Sir." Bai Qing rushed to Zhuowen's side and cupped his hands respectfully. Zhuowen nodded. After waiting in the air for a while, 2 more rainbows flew over. It was Xue Hui and Elder Zhu. "Brother Zhua." The two of them cupped their hands politely. "I wonder where the 100 people in the Wind Thunder Prefecture will gather?" Zhuowen asked calmly. Yang Yi said that we will know when we reach the central palace of the Primal Chaos Temple, Shuhui said in confusion. In that case, let's go to the central palace of the Primal Chaos Temple first. Chapter 1775. Experts from various prefectures at that moment. The central palace was still being carried by the gigantic Tao Tai. In front of the central palace, there was a gigantic fragment of land. The fragment of land was many times bigger than the celestial market that the everlasting family had opened. It was at least a few million miles wide. Roar! The gigantic Tao Tai roared and leaped up. It landed in the middle of the fragment of land. At the top of the palace, there were two figures standing quietly. Zhuowen was no stranger to the two figures. They were the Lord God of the Chaos Temple, Douhua, and the Celestial Saint Master, Gugu. Rise! Douhua's eyes shone brightly. He waved his right sleeve and more than 10 praying mats that were emitting white light flew out. They were arranged in more than 10 directions above the central palace. On each of the praying mats, there was a figure sitting cross-legged. Each of the figures had a terrifying aura. Among them, the fighting Buddha demon saint Shiji, whom Zhuowen was familiar with, was sitting on one of the praying mats. Other than that, he also saw the ancestor of the Wangren clan He Wuxiang, and the four masters of the Tai Yin, Tai Yang, Tai Gu, and Tai Su battlefields. Other than these few people, the other people on the praying mats had extremely powerful auras. They were at least at the heaven immortal realm. They should be the ancestor of the various forces. These supreme overlords in the central region must have been personally invited by Douhua. Their purpose was to open the primordial battlefield. After all, the Chaos Temple alone would not be able to open the primordial battlefield. They had to gather all the top forces in the central region. Moreover, the opening of the primordial battlefield was beneficial to the overlords in the central region. Naturally, they were willing to help the Chaos Temple. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At the same time, streaks of light landed on the fragments one after another, revealing the silhouettes of cultivators. However, the moment these warriors entered the fragment, they were brought to their respective places by the messengers of chaos to wait for the war of the gods to begin. At that moment, the moment Zhuowen, Shuhui, Old Man Ju, and Baiqing entered the fragment, Yang Yi's lazy voice rang in their minds. Little fellows within the Wind Thunder Prefecture's territory gather at the plaza at the northeast corner. Hearing this, the four of them looked at each other. They didn't dare to be negligent and rushed towards the northeast corner that Yang Yi had pointed out. Sure enough, they saw a huge square there. At this moment, many people had gathered in the square. Most of them were martial artists from other prefectures. In the sky above the square, there were 8 figures sitting cross-legged. These 8 figures were far lower than the figures on the praying mats suspended above the central divine palace. Zhuowen was no stranger to these 8 figures. They were the messengers of chaos who led the geniuses of the 9 divine talisman clans to the Chaos Temple. However, because the prefecture where the prophet's family was located gave up on participating in the divine war, there were only 8 messengers of chaos this time. When Zhuowen, Shuhui, Old Man Ju and Baiqing arrived at the square, they saw Yang Yi lying lazily on the green qilin in the sky not far from the square. The 4 of them looked at each other and rushed to join the group behind Yang Yi. The arrival of the 4 of them didn't attract much attention. Only Yang Yi slowly opened his eyes and said indifferently, "Zhuowen, in this group, you should be the strongest. Stand in front of the group." As soon as these words left his mouth, Zhuowen, who was standing at the back of the group, was stunned. Soon after, he noticed that everyone's eyes were on him. He looked at Yang Yi, who was smiling, and had no choice but to stand out and stand in front of the group. This lad has really made a breakthrough. Not far away, in front of the group led by the Wangren clan, he stared at Zhuowen with a gloomy gaze. He thought to himself coldly, he's only in the early stage of the earthly immortal realm. If it wasn't for the black lightning this time, what could this lad do? Yu's eyes flickered. The only thing he was afraid of was the black lightning that Zhuowen had shown in the auction. Even his clan's ancestor, He Wuxiang, found it troublesome. Fortunately, the divine war this time was extremely fair. These powerful external objects would definitely be banned by the divine master, Douhua. Everything depended on one's true strength. Therefore, he wasn't too afraid of Zhuowen. In his opinion, without the black lightning, Zhuowen was like a hungry wolf without claws and teeth. He was no threat at all. Zhuowen stood in front of the group and welcomed the countless gazes around him. In particular, there were a few gazes that were extremely unfriendly. This made Zhuowen sneer in his heart. He didn't need to look to know who these gazes belonged to. One of them was He Yu from the Wangren clan, and the other was Jiangzhe from the Ice and Fire clan. In addition to these two people, another person also caught Zhuowen's attention. This person had messy hair and was quite young. He was about 30 years old. There were strange bloodstains drawn on his face, giving him a bloodthirsty feeling. This person was the man with messy hair that Zhuowen had met at the entrance of the auction. During the first round of the auction, he had a face-to-face transaction with Zhuowen. This man was also an expert from the Blood Sacrifice clan, one of the 9 great holy talisman clans, Kong Haogan. Although the hostility in Kong Haogan's eyes was very faint, it was still detected by Zhuowen. He knew that Kong Haogan wasn't very satisfied with the previous transaction, so he was also a little dissatisfied with Zhuowen. As for Dong Qixin from the Heavy Shield clan, he glanced at Zhuowen indifferently. His eyes flickered and he seemed to be a man of few words. Young Master Zhua, congratulations on breaking through to the earthly immortal realm before the divine battle. It seems that young Master Zhua will be a tough opponent in this divine battle. Not far away, Ji Chenyan, who was standing at the front of the Everlasting Family's team, looked like a pure and flawless white lotus. Her beautiful eyes were slightly curved, like a pair of beautiful crescent moons. She smiled at Zhuowen and said in a charming voice. Ji Chenyan's words attracted the attention of most of the martial artists. Many of them revealed a look of infatuation. Ji Chenyan wasn't the type of beauty that could cause the downfall of a country. Instead, she had a kind of otherworldly temperament. The moment she appeared in front of you, the first thing you noticed was not her appearance, but the faintly discernible tranquil temperament. Zhuowen smiled and said, Miss Ji, you flatter me. A mere early-stage earthly immortal realm expert can be regarded as the strongest person in the Wind Thunder Mansion. Isn't this too ridiculous? Is the Wind and Thunder clan a bunch of good-for-nothings? They don't even have a decent expert? Suddenly, a man standing in the neighboring team of Zhuowen sneered. His eyes swept over Zhuowen's team like a torch, his face full of disdain. Zhuowen turned his head slightly and stared at the sneering man beside him. The man looked to be in his 40s, and there was a rather majestic eagle perched on his right shoulder. Zhuowen looked at the eagle on the middle-aged man's shoulder. His eyes flickered. For some reason, he felt a strange sense of threat from the eagle. This eagle is not simple, Zhuowen thought to himself. He couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the middle-aged man. Instead, he continued to size up the experts in the other teams not far away. This man's name is Wei Rui. He's an expert from the Beast Envoy clan, one of the 9 Saint Talisman clans. Don't underestimate him just because his cultivation is only at the mid-stage earthly immortal realm. His full strength isn't in his body, but in the eagle on his shoulder. If he really exerts his full strength, even a late-stage earthly immortal realm expert would be wary of him. Ji Chenyan said secretly. Zhuowen's heart skipped a beat. He nodded, indicating that he understood. Wei Rui curled his lips when he saw that Zhuowen was ignoring him. His eyes slowly turned gloomy. There were a total of 8 teams gathered in the square. There were more than 800 people in total. These 800 people were the best of the best in the central region. Even the weakest among them was a heaven-defying Saint Realm expert. The 8 teams were led by the Icefire clan, the Eternity clan, the Heavy Shield clan, the Beast Envoy clan, the Blood Sacrifice clan, the Wangren clan, the Spiral Thorn clan, and Zhuowen's team. Zhuowen saw the leaders of the other 6 teams, but he didn't see the face of the Whirlpool Thorn family's expert. He looked at the team led by the Spiral Thorn clan with surprise. He saw a black-veiled woman standing in front of the team. Her figure was extremely eye-catching. She was curvy in all the right places. The reason Zhuowen revealed a surprised expression was naturally not because the leader was a woman, and it was because this woman's cultivation was actually merely at the initial stage of the earthly immortal realm. However, Zhuowen was able to sense that this woman was probably not simple. What surprised Zhuowen was that the team led by the black-veiled woman had fewer earthly immortals than his team. There were only about 2 of them. It could be said that they were at the bottom of the 8 teams. Perhaps because she noticed Zhuowen's gaze, the black-veiled woman raised her head slightly. Her beautiful eyes were filled with indifference. She glanced at Zhuowen and turned her head away, no longer looking at Zhuowen. For hundreds of years, the Spiral Thorn clan's development has been getting worse and worse. Their talents have withered. Even the famous ancestor of the Spiral Thorn clan, Situ Wuyang, went into seclusion a long time ago and never appeared again. In the end, the Spiral Thorn clan declined to its current state. Among the 9 great Saint Talisman clans, the Spiral Thorn clan is ranked second from the bottom, and the Prophet clan is ranked first from the bottom. However, due to the birth of the goddess, the Prophet clan has begun to grow stronger. Their strength and foundation have actually surpassed the Spiral Thorn clan. Ji Chunyan was quite observant. After noticing Zhuowen's gaze on the black-veiled woman, she timely introduced the situation of the Spiral Thorn clan to Zhuowen. Hearing this, Zhuowen nodded and withdrew his gaze. However, the moment Zhuowen withdrew his gaze, the black-veiled woman's beautiful eyes shot over. However, she wasn't looking at Zhuowen. Instead, she was looking at Yang Yi, who was floating above Zhuowen and lazily lying on the back of the green qilin. Chapter 1776. The Ancient Boulder. When everyone gathered in the square, Do Hua took a step forward with his right foot. Carrying the Taotai of the central palace, he walked step by step until he finally arrived in front of the square. Do Hua looked down at the people in the square and formed a seal with his hands. Invisible ripples appeared between his hands and spread out in all directions. The Ancient Boulder. Do Hua pointed to the sky with his right hand. Immediately, the invisible ripples turned into an invisible hurricane and swept across the sky. In an instant, wind and clouds gathered in the sky and thunder rumbled. Swoosh! Soon after, a terrifying sonic boom tore through the void and suddenly descended. Everywhere it passed, countless amounts of space collapsed, and layers of strange air waves spread out in all directions. Rumble! The speed of this black figure was too fast. In the blink of an eye, it landed on the square. Immediately, everyone felt an extremely intense vibration being emitted from the square. The entire land appeared to be wiggling. After which a ring-shaped air wave followed and charged over in layers. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and waved his sleeve. His surging celestial core power formed a light barrier in front of him, blocking the terrifying wave of air outside of him. The surrounding people also started to put up their defenses one after another, blocking this wild air wave that was roaring towards them. When the air waves gradually subsided, everyone discovered that in the center of the square, there was a huge pit, and in the center of the huge pit, there was a huge rock that was hundreds of meters tall standing there silently. The rock was oval-shaped and its surface was dark. It was full of bumps and hollows, like a meteorite that fell from the sky. This is the Ancient Boulder, a meteorite that suppresses the primordial battlefield. It possesses unparalleled and terrifying power. Only by carving your name on this ancient boulder will you be qualified to enter the primordial battlefield. In this divine war, 99 Chaos War Gods will be conferred. Only by obtaining the Chaos War God will you be qualified to carve your name on the ancient boulder. Do Hua's eyes were calm, but his voice was like thunder that exploded in everyone's ears. His words immediately caused a commotion. Many cultivators in the square stared at the ancient boulder with fervent gazes. They knew that the ancient boulder was the key to entering the ancient battlefield. The divinity battle is divided into 3 stages, 2 Daros and 1 entering the primordial era. These 3 stages are the heaven, earth and profound stages. The first stage is the profound stage. As he spoke, Do Hua flicked his finger. Immediately, an extremely hot white glow shot out from his finger and floated in the air. Then, the white light began to wriggle and turned into a celestial pool that was tens of thousands of feet wide. Inside the celestial pond, the celestial spring gushed out, and celestial mist lingered around it. An extremely surging celestial qi spread out like mist, and it looked extremely magnificent. When they sensed the dense celestial qi in the celestial pool, many warriors below were excited. The celestial qi in the celestial pool was even denser than in the inner hall of the Chaos Temple. There was no doubt that if they could soak in the celestial pool, it would bring unimaginable benefits to their cultivation. The moment the celestial pool was formed, a long flight of stairs appeared below the celestial pool. The stairs led up to the edge of the celestial pool. The profound stage is to ascend the stairs and reach the celestial pool. It will prove whether you are qualified to enter the celestial pool. Do Hua said calmly. Chen Su, you will be in charge of the profound stage. A green light shot out from the sky and reached the edge of the celestial pool in an instant. The light faded away, revealing a middle-aged man in a green robe. The middle-aged man looked arrogant. He cupped his hands respectfully at Do Hua and said in a deep voice, "Greetings, Divine Master." Do Hua nodded. Then, Chen Su turned his head and looked down indifferently at the crowd below. He said, "I will be in charge of the profound stage. I will set all the rules. If there is anyone who disagrees, feel free to speak up. I will teach them how to behave properly." Chen Su's words were extremely arrogant and caused quite an uproar in the square. Many cultivators were indignant and stared at Chen Su angrily. They were all people who stood at the peak of their respective prefectures. In their prefectures, they were all powerful and could make countless people tremble with a stomp of their feet. But now, Chen Su's arrogant and disdainful attitude made them extremely angry. The representatives of the various Saint Talisman clans narrowed their eyes and looked at Chen Su, who was standing proudly at the edge of the celestial pool. Obviously, they were unhappy with Chen Su's attitude. Chen Su naturally saw the unfriendly gazes of the people below, but he ignored them. The corners of his mouth were full of a sneer. However, when his gaze fell on Yang Yi, who was lying lazily on the green qilin above Zhuo Wen, his face suddenly became gloomy. "Brother Yang Yi, when did you become willing to run errands?" Chen Su said mockingly. Yang Yi yawned lazily and said, "I just feel that it's too boring to stay in the Divine Temple for too long, so it's not a bad idea to go out and run errands. Otherwise, I'm afraid my brain will be damaged if I stay here for too long. Don't you think so, Brother Chen Su?" Chen Su's eyes narrowed. He stared at Zhuowen with a gloomy face and said coldly, "Brother Yang Yi is really ambitious." Speaking till here, Chen Su did not say anything else, but his gaze faintly shifted towards the group below Yang Yi, especially towards Zhuowen, who was standing at the front. He gave him an extra glance and said, "Let's start the entrance examination now. Those who wish to enter the celestial pool must first pass through the entrance examination. I will select some people to come up and challenge this entrance examination." Then Chen Su pointed at a person in Ji Qinyan's team. This person's cultivation was around the heaven-defying Saint realm. Among the 800 people, he could only be considered to be in the lower tier. This person was obviously very nervous. Under Chen Su's instructions, he came to the stairs and suddenly stepped up. Boom! Suddenly, a thunderous sound came from the top of the stairs. Then, an extremely powerful and strange white light appeared around the stairs. The white light began to wriggle and formed a huge white shadow. Zhuo Wen's eyes were like torches as his gaze landed on Chen Su. Although Chen Su was standing quietly at the edge of the celestial pool with his hands behind his back, Zhuo Wen's sharp divine sense could sense a rather powerful force surging out from under Chen Su's feet. It was precisely because of the emergence of this power that a strange white light gushed out from the stairs. Furthermore, this white light wriggled to form such a strange white illusory figure. It could be said that this white shadow was formed under Chen Su's control. This method was very mysterious and strange. Not only that, Zhuowen could sense a hint of unfriendliness in the eyes of Chen Su earlier on. And that unfriendliness should be because of Yang Yi. Seemed like there was quite a bit of conflict between Chen Su and Yang Yi back in the Chaos Shrine. "Zhuowen, Chen Su is the #1 messenger of chaos. Because I accidentally defeated him last time, he holds a grudge against me. I'm afraid that he will be harsh on the warriors in my team. You should be careful." Just as Zhuowen was feeling puzzled, Yang Yi's voice rang out in his sea of consciousness. This caused Zhuowen to be rather surprised. No wonder Chen Su and Yang Yi were at odds with each other. Judging from Chen Su's aura, he should be at the peak of the earthly immortal realm. Yang Yi could easily defeat him, so there was no doubt that Yang Yi had the strength of a celestial immortal. However, Zhuowen could not guess which celestial immortal realm he was in. As soon as the white shadow formed, it rushed toward the man who had stepped up the stairs like a gust of wind. The man was shocked, but after all, he was not an ordinary person. He let out a low roar and waved his sleeve. He was about to take out a divine weapon from his spiritual ring to resist the strange white shadow. However, soon, his eyes were filled with astonishment. He exclaimed, "I can't open the spiritual ring." This boom. Before the man could recover from his shock, the white shadow's right fist came whistling and hit his face hard. The man was caught off guard. He let out a low roar and clenched his right fist to punch out. Bang! The man groaned and spat out a mouthful of blood. He flew backward and hit the ground. You want to rely on external objects? What a piece of trash. Let me tell you, in a divine battle, relying on external objects is an extremely stupid act. It is also forbidden. Put away your wishful thinking. Next, Chen Su looked at the man who had been blown away with disdain. He then pointed at another man and asked him to come up. The second man's face darkened. He took a step forward and climbed up the stairs. He clasped his fist at Chen Su. This man's cultivation was slightly higher than the first man. He should have reached the peak of the heaven-defying saint realm. The moment he stepped on the stairs, he mobilized all of his saint power and gathered it in his body. He was fully prepared. Boom! The white shadow suddenly strode over and punched out, bringing with it countless explosive sounds, crackling and rattling. The man's eyes were gloomy. He roared and pushed his palms forward. His saint power was like water, and turned into a towering tree. It appeared in front of the white shadow and blocked the white shadow's punch. Then he found a gap and dispersed the white shadow. When Chen Su saw this, the corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. The man looked excited. He then took a step forward and walked up the stairs. As this person walked up a flight of stairs, another white illusory figure appeared. Moreover, this white illusory figure's aura was even stronger than before. The man's face changed slightly. He was caught off guard and was sent flying by the white shadow's punch. My lord, why didn't you explain the rules clearly before? The man was unconvinced. Chen Su looked at the man coldly. He grabbed with his right hand, and a terrifying force of imprisonment lingered around the man. Then the man was thrown out by this invisible force. I said that I set the rules. Since you don't have the strength to step on the stairs, you blame me. What qualifications do you have to advance to the next level? Get lost. Chen Su said coldly. Chapter 1777. Entrance hall. Time passed quickly. For hours had passed, and more than half of the warriors had gone through the test. Only 40% of them had passed. Moreover, this qualification was not solely determined by the stairs. There were a total of 30 stairs, and as the stairs extended upwards, the white shadow's power grew stronger and stronger. Very few people were able to reach the edge of the celestial pool. Therefore, Chen Su had set the passing standard at 12 steps. If someone could reach 12 steps or above, they would pass. Zhuowen looked around and realized that Yuan Hongwen was nowhere to be found in the plaza. He pondered for a moment. He knew that with Yuan Hongwen's status and reputation, the Divine Master Do Hua had probably given him the qualification to advance to the final round. However, Yuan Hongwen did indeed have the qualifications. Back then at the auction, although he had only met Yuan Hongwen once, he was able to feel an extremely strong sense of threat from this person. Even though his cultivation had reached the earth immortal realm, and his divine body had reached the small perfection, he still couldn't forget his encounter with Yuan Hongwen. He had a feeling that if he really encountered Yuan Hongwen, he would have to give it his all in order to have the strength to fight him. This feeling was very strange and unfounded, but it appeared so clearly in his mind. Bang, bang, bang. At this moment, muffled sounds came from the top of the steps. Then, a beautiful figure stepped onto the steps like a hot knife through butter. This beautiful figure was none other than the most outstanding junior of the everlasting family, Ji Chenyan. At this moment, Ji Chenyan stretched out her jade-like hand, and countless white lotuses bloomed. The dazzling power of the blooming flowers was like countless explosions, shattering the white illusory images formed on the stairs. She's reached the 29th step. The crowd was in an uproar as they looked at the scene in shock. From the beginning of the test until now, no one had reached the 30th step and reached the edge of the celestial pool. Ji Chunyan was the closest to it. Chun Su's eyes shone brightly as he looked at Ji Chunyan carefully. He couldn't help but nod his head with a rare look of admiration. Moreover, there was a rare look of passion in the depths of his eyes. Boom! The moment Ji Chunyan stepped onto the 30th step, the white shadow appeared once again. This time, the white shadow's aura was too vast, much stronger than the previous 29 times. It had actually reached the late Earth Immortal realm, which wasn't something an ordinary Earth Immortal could handle. Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes narrowed. She clenched her jade-like hands and said in a low voice, "Immortal technique, White Lotus hand." With that, white lotuses bloomed in the space around Ji Chunyan. Then, the white lotuses gathered behind her and formed a huge white lotus. From the stamen of the white lotus, a huge white hand reached out. The hand formed an orchid shape and slammed into the white shadow. Soon after, a series of explosions erupted in the void. Then, the white shadow was unable to resist at all, and was blasted into powder by the white lotus hand. Whoosh! Ji Chunyan's jade feet stomped on the ground, and she was like a dancing butterfly as she slowly descended to the edge of the celestial pool. She stood not too far away from Chun Su, and a strand of cool breeze blew by, causing her waist-length hair to flutter, causing her to possess a different type of graceful bearing. Chun Su stared at the beautiful figure in front of him. The passion in his eyes intensified. He couldn't help but clap his hands and exclaim, "Good! Miss Ji is indeed the most outstanding junior of the everlasting family. You far surpassed the others and become the first person to reach the edge of the celestial pool. Excellent." Ji Chunyan bowed to Chun Su. Her beautiful eyes were filled with politeness as she said, "Chunyan was just lucky. The other representatives of the Saint Talisman family could also reach the 30th step. It's just that Chunyan appeared earlier, so I stole their limelight." Chun Su waved his hand and said with a smile, "Miss Ji is too modest. Your reputation in the Central Plains is catching up to you on Hongwen. Moreover, you have such a cultivation at such a young age. It's rare and commendable. Which one of them hasn't cultivated for a longer time than you? If they're still inferior to you, they should have found a latrine pit and jumped into it." Chun Su was extremely arrogant. He didn't consider the feelings of others when he spoke. When he spoke, the expressions of the other representatives of the Saint Talisman family turned ugly. However, because Chun Su was the host of the entrance, they didn't say anything and only snorted coldly. Ji Chunyan shook her head and said, "Senior's words are too absolute. In this divine battle, other than Yuan Hongwen, there's another person who hasn't cultivated for a long time. In fact, it's even shorter than Chunyan. However, I'm afraid his strength isn't much weaker than Chunyan's." Chun Su couldn't help but raise his brows. He asked in astonishment, "There's another person? I wonder who that is." Chun Su was curious. He basically knew all the earthly immortal realm warriors in the 9 Saint Talisman families. Those earthly immortals had cultivated for hundreds of years. At the very least, they had cultivated for 500 years. Some had even cultivated for thousands of years. Chun Su didn't care much about these earthly immortals. He knew that if they were still stuck in the earthly immortal realm after cultivating for such a long time, there was no hope for them to break through in this lifetime. Although Ji Chunyan's cultivation wasn't as high as the older generation of earthly immortals, she hadn't cultivated for a long time. Regardless of strength or talent, she was much stronger than the older generation of earthly immortals. However, Ji Chunyan said that there was someone who had cultivated for a shorter time than her, and whose strength wasn't inferior to hers. How could Chun Su not be curious? Ji Chunyan smiled but didn't answer Chun Su's question. Instead she said, "Senior should know when the time comes." After speaking, Ji Chunyan took a step forward. Like a dancing butterfly, she landed gracefully in the group led by the Eternity family. Chun Su's eyes flickered. He soon noticed that Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes would occasionally fall on Zhuowen, who was standing below Yang Yi. Could it be that the person Miss Ji was talking about is this guy? Chun Su's gaze fell on Zhuowen as he pondered. Shortly after, he pointed at Zhuowen with his right hand and said, You, come up. Zhuowen's eyes were calm. He took a step forward with his right foot and slowly leaped up the stairs. Hurry up. How can you be so slow? What a disgrace. Chunsu was a little impatient. He grabbed with his right hand. Immediately, surging immortal core power condensed into a giant hand and grabbed at Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were gloomy. This giant hand didn't show any mercy and directly grabbed at him. If he was caught by this giant hand, although it wouldn't be fatal, he would definitely be injured. Clearly, Chunsu was doing this on purpose. Zhuowen's eyes turned cold. He formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, 3 golden runes burst out from his body. They turned into 3 golden rainbows and blasted at the giant hand. The golden runes were extremely powerful. The 3 golden runes formed a triangular shape and surrounded the giant hand. Shortly after, golden light exploded and froze the giant hand. However, the giant hand only froze for a moment before it blasted away the 3 golden runes and quickly reached out. Zhuowen stroked his right hand and put away the 3 golden runes. At the same time, 3 more golden runes appeared on his body. 6 9-turn golden runes circled around Zhuowen's right arm. Shortly after, he threw a punch. The 6 golden runes spun rapidly and formed a terrifying cyclone. Boom. Zhuowen punched out, and the giant hand collapsed. Zhuowen took a few steps back. He used his holy physique, which was at the small perfection saint physique, to completely offset the terrifying recoil from the collision. This collision immediately attracted the attention of the experts on the praying mats above. Divine Master Dohua glanced at Zhuowen in surprise. Although Chunsu had casually used that move, it was still a very powerful attack. Although Chunsu had casually thrown out a casual attack, Zhuowen was only in the initial stage of the Earth Immortal Realm. He might be able to take this attack, but he definitely wouldn't be unharmed. Moreover, he looked so relaxed now. This kid is not simple. No wonder he was so confident about winning first place in the divine battle. However, it's not that easy to win first place in the divine battle. I wonder how this kid will perform next? Dohua thought to himself. The fighting Buddha demon saint, Shiji, who was seated cross-legged on one of the praying mats, glanced at Zhuowen and revealed an expression of admiration. He was also rather gratified by Zhuowen's rapid progress. After destroying the large hand, Zhuowen slowly walked up the stairs. On the other hand, Chunsu's face was somewhat gloomy. He did not expect that Zhuowen would be able to destroy his attack so easily. What's your name? Chunsu asked expressionlessly. Zhuowen. Zhuowen replied indifferently. Chunsu squinted his eyes and said in a deep voice, Zhuowen? Chunsu had investigated Zhuowen before. He remembered that Yang Yi had a junior brother in the eastern land of the 4 great territories. Yang Yi had taken the initiative to become a messenger of chaos. He was afraid that it was for Zhuowen. Let's start. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of Chunsu's mouth. Soon after, he formed a white shadow on the first step and pounced toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen was as calm as an ancient well. At this moment, his spiritual power and his divine body had completely fused with his main body. His strength was definitely the strongest he had ever been. Zhuowen pointed his finger. Countless yellow springs emerged and formed dozens of yellow springs death needles. They revolved around his body and spun rapidly. Bang! Before the white shadow could get close to Zhuowen, it was pierced by the yellow springs death needles. Zhuowen stepped onto the second step. The moment the white shadow appeared, it was smashed into powder by the yellow springs death needles. Ding! 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 Zhuowen continued to step onto the second step. He didn't stop at all. The moment the white shadow appeared, it would be smashed into nothingness by Zhuowen's yellow springs death needles. The speed at which Zhuowen ascended the stairs had far exceeded everyone's expectations. He was even faster than Ji Chenyan. Moreover, there was no sloppiness in the process. He ascended the stairs smoothly like flowing water. Chunsu's eyes were cold as he stared at Zhuowen. He didn't say a word. Chapter 1778. Starfinger. When dozens of white shadows were formed, Zhuowen's face darkened. Although he had not entered the 30th step before, Ji Chenyan had. At that time, it was only a white shadow. But now, when Zhuowen stepped onto the 30th step, dozens of white shadows appeared. Each of them was not much weaker than the white shadow that Ji Chunyan had encountered on the 30th step. Without a doubt, this was Chun Su's intention. It was obvious that he wanted to stop Zhuowen from entering the 30th step. Dozens of white shadows? Ji Chunyan frowned. She had experienced the white shadows on the 30th step. They were very powerful, and could not be compared to the white shadows on the other steps. Even if she were to face these dozens of white shadows, she might be able to break through if she used all her strength, but she would have to pay a high price. When the other warriors in the square saw this scene, they were also stunned. However, most of them were gloating over the other's misfortune. Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the back of the green qilin. He narrowed his eyes and stared coldly at Chun Su. Sitting on the futon at the top, Shiji's eyes were also cold, but he did not make a move. He wanted to see how powerful Zhuowen was after he had broken through to the earthly immortal realm. Slaughtering finger of Acheron. Zhuowen bent his right finger and pointed at the void. Suddenly, countless Acheron water droplets appeared and formed a yellow vortex on the surface of his body. At the same time, Zhuowen formed seals with his right hand, causing surging immortal energy to gush out from within his body. It formed into a 30 kilometers tall lone peak in the space behind him, and it suddenly stood horizontally before him, causing it to seem extraordinarily mighty and imposing. Bang! 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 The moment the lone peak was formed, dozens of white phantoms also rushed over. Their sharp claws mercilessly smashed onto the lone peak. Immediately, continuous explosive sounds rang out on the surface of the lone peak, and countless gravel shattered and fell from the top of the lone peak. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and retreated a few steps under the huge force. However, the moment he retreated to the 30th step, he pointed out his right hand and performed the devouring curse forbidden skill. In an instant, numerous runes burst out from Zhuowen's palm like a swarm of locusts. These runes were dark red, and as soon as they appeared, they attached themselves to the lone peak. The moment the rune was attached to the peak, the entire peak was covered with extremely intense restrictive light. Its aura skyrocketed like a rocket, directly blocking the dozens of white phantoms. Zhuowen's gaze was extremely calm. His right hand pointed at the void again, and countless runes formed dark red chains. The surface of these chains was covered with runes of various shapes. The chains swept out and covered the surroundings, directly trapping the dozens of white shadows in the vicinity. The surface of these curse seal chains was filled with a terrifying sealing power. The moment the white shadow was bound, it became motionless. It could only stand on the spot and continue to struggle. At this moment, Zhuowen's gaze was extremely cold. His right hand formed a sword finger, and the underworld spring condensed at the tip of his finger. Then he immediately rushed to the nearest white shadow and pointed at its forehead. Oh! The white shadow roared to the sky. His eyes were filled with pain. Then his essence was sucked dry by the underworld spring and he collapsed. The moment the white shadow collapsed, Chun Su's pupils shrank. These white shadows were formed by his essence. Generally, after being defeated, the essence would return to his body. But now, Zhuowen pointed at the white shadow, and the essence in the collapsed white shadow seemed to disappear into thin air. There was no sign of it returning at all. Bang! 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 In that instant, Zhuowen consecutively destroyed nearly half of the white phantoms. These collapsed white phantoms were similar to the previous one. Their essence did not automatically return to Chun Su's body. Instead, it was as if they had evaporated into thin air. It's this guy's doing. Chun Su's gaze was cold. Soon his gaze locked on Zhuowen. He shouted coldly, "Stop. You've passed this round." Zhuowen glanced at Chun Su indifferently, but the corner of his mouth revealed a mocking smile. He had already reached the 30th step, but he only passed. In addition, Chun Su deliberately made things difficult for him at the 30th step. How could he easily stop? Furthermore, based on Zhuowen's previous observations, he knew that these white phantoms were formed from Chun Su's essence qi, and the yellow springs of massacre was the nemesis of essence qi. If Zhuowen did not absorb the remaining white phantoms, he would not stop. "I told you to stop. Are you deaf?" Chun Su roared. His right hand pointed, and suddenly, the celestial core power in his body surged out and condensed into tiny stars at his fingertip. However, it was precisely this tiny star that caused Zhuo Wen's heart to palpitate. His pupils shrunk to the size of needles. He could feel a sense of danger from the star that caused him to panic. Celestial Art Star Finger. Chen Su coldly shouted as he pointed a finger with his right hand. Immediately, the stars that had been condensed to the limit suddenly shot towards Zhuo Wen like a shuttle. Their speed exceeded everyone's imagination. The moment Chen Su used the celestial art, the square was in an uproar. After all, Chen Su was in existence at the peak of the earthly immortal realm. Such an existence actually used the celestial art on an early earthly immortal realm tester. On the other hand, He Yu, who was in the Wangren family, was gloating. The celestial art used by a peak earthly immortal was much more powerful than an early earthly immortal realm tester. On the stairway of the celestial pool, as they could not use spiritual rings, He Yu knew that even if Chen Su had the strange black lightning, he could not use it. Therefore, he knew that Chen Su was going to be in big trouble this time. Zhuo Wen squinted his eyes and immediately combined the underworld spring finger, celestial art, lone peak, and devouring curse. He turned into a long rainbow and rushed towards the star finger. Bang! The two violently collided. Soon after, Zhuo Wen was shocked to discover that the star formed by the point star finger had actually directly exploded, transforming into a resplendent nebula. Of course, this nebula was still far from the huge nebula that the Divine Lord Dohua used in the Shattered Skull Abyss. However, the power of this celestial art was extraordinary. The two were in a stalemate. Shortly after, Zhuo Wen's pupils shrank as he found that the nebula formed by the star finger began to spin rapidly. Then the long rainbow formed by the combination of the underworld spring finger, celestial art, lone peak, and devouring curse was shattered. Zhuo Wen let out a muffled groan, and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Shortly after, the star finger was extremely fast. It brought along an enormous nebula, wanting to envelop Zhuo Wen's entire body and form a nebula prison. Zhuo Wen's gaze was solemn. Soon after, his right foot slightly stepped on the ground, and immediately, an invisible ripple spread out from under his feet. Then, Zhuo Wen's figure seemed to have transcended time and space, and actually gradually disappeared from where he stood. The star finger just happened to rush over, and actually missed. The ripple of energy under Zhuo Wen's foot was extremely faint. However, it could not escape from Dohua, Shiji, and the other ancestor-level experts who were sitting on a dozen praying mats. This energy is so strange. Shiji's eyes lit up as he muttered softly. On the other hand, Dohua narrowed his eyes and revealed a wisp of seriousness and curiosity. He had also sensed the strangeness of the invisible ripple from before. It was a different kind of energy that he had never sensed before. Or rather, it was an energy of a different level. Ji Wubing, the ancestor of the everlasting family, and the four masters of the battlefield also opened their eyes. They all stared blankly at Zhuo Wen with puzzlement in their eyes. The invisible ripple appeared again. Then, Zhuo Wen's figure slowly appeared in front of the other white phantoms. Zhuo Wen's movements were not slow. He condensed the underworld spring finger in his right hand, and pointed it at the glabella of the remaining white phantoms, absorbing all the essence of these white phantoms. Chen Su was also shocked by Zhuo Wen's scene. He was still in a daze. However, when he came back to his senses, Zhuo Wen had already defeated all the remaining white phantoms. Chen Su let out a muffled groan as a strange flush appeared on his face. Shortly after, the flush quickly receded and his face turned pale. "You bastard!" Chen Su's face was pale, but his eyes were filled with rage. The dozens of white phantoms were all formed by his essence. How could Chen Su not be angry when they were all taken away, causing him a lot of internal injuries? Chen Su, who had lost his mind, did not care about the rules of the entrance. He pointed his finger again, and used the star finger again. This time, Chen Su used all the celestial core power in his body without any regard for his life. The star finger he used was much more powerful and terrifying than before. Zhuo Wen's eyes were cold. Although he might be able to compete with Chen Su if he used all his trump cards, it was only the first of the 3 heaven, earth, and mysterious gates. He did not want to reveal all his strength so soon. However, Chinsu did not give him any time to think. He rushed toward Zhuowen like a madman. He was so fast that he was like a rainbow that cut through the sky. It seems that I can't hold back anymore. Zhuowen sighed inwardly. Just as he was about to display his perfect saint body, a cold snort suddenly sounded. Immediately, Chinsu, who was rushing over, suddenly froze in midair. Then, a painful expression appeared on his face as he spat out a mouthful of blood. He did not move forward but retreated a few thousand steps before he could barely stop himself. His eyes were filled with horror. Chinsu, don't forget that you are in charge of the hidden gate this time. It is not for you to abuse your power, but for you to handle this fair and just. Now, your appearance really makes me very disappointed. Do Hua glanced coldly at Chinsu. Then he looked at Zhuowen and said with a slightly relaxed expression, "Little friend Zhuowen, it's rare and commendable that you were able to ascend to the 30th step. You're extremely outstanding in this trial. Go down." Zhuowen stood up, but did not follow Do Hua's order. Instead, his eyes fell on Shiji, who was not far from Do Hua. Chapter 1779. Earth Pass. Shiji's timing was extremely tricky. It was when everyone's attention was on Zhuowen and Chinsu. Even Do Hua did not expect Shiji to make a move. When Do Hua wanted to stop Shiji, it was already too late. Moreover, Shiji's aura had already locked onto him. If he made any rash moves, Shiji would not show any mercy. Swoosh. The demonic chi was extremely fast. It reached Chinsu in an instant. Due to Do Hua's shout, Chinsu was already injured internally. He had yet to recover from his shock. Now that the demonic chi was approaching him, a strong sense of danger rose in his heart. The sense of danger was so strong that it caused Chinsu's heart to beat wildly. He retreated without hesitation. At the same time, Chinsu pointed with his right hand and used the celestial art, Starfinger. This Starfinger was formed using all of Chinsu's celestial core power. The devil chi gave him a sense of danger, so he had no choice but to use all of his strength. Starfinger. Celestial origin power gathered at the tip of Chinsu's right hand to form dazzling starlight. The starlight was extremely dazzling, as though it was a real star in the sky. Countless nebulas surrounded him. At the center of the nebula, an extremely bright star shot out and blasted toward the demonic chi. Rumble. What happened next caused Chinsu's pupils to shrink to the extreme. He even revealed an expression of disbelief and fear. The moment Chinsu's Starfinger, which had gathered all of Chinsu's strength, came into contact with the demonic chi, it was instantly enveloped by the demonic chi. Then, as the demonic chi kept wriggling, the Starfinger directly collapsed into nothingness. Swoosh. After the Starfinger was destroyed, the demonic chi flew into Chinsu's forehead like a shuttle. Then, Chinsu froze on the spot as though time had stopped. Bang, bang, bang. However, the stillness did not last long. Blood mist burst out of Chinsu's body. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with the desire to die. Swoosh. The demonic chi that had just entered Chinsu's dantian suddenly rushed out. Upon closer inspection, one could see that Chinsu's primordial spirit was wrapped in the demonic chi. The demonic chi arrived in front of Shiji. Shiji opened his mouth and swallowed the demonic chi. When they saw this scene, many people felt a chill in their hearts. Shiji's actions were like the actions of a devil. He had actually directly swallowed the soul spirit of another into his stomach. It was truly slightly outrageous. However, when they recalled Shiji's nickname, no one dared to say anything. After all, Shiji's nickname was the Fighting Buddha Demon Saint. This person was both a Buddha and a demon. He cultivated both the demonic way and the Buddhist way. It was actually not strange for him to do such a demonic act. Do Hua had an unsightly expression on his face. He stared coldly at Shiji and said, "Shiji, Chinsu is the #1 envoy of chaos of my chaos temple. Aren't you looking down on me by killing him just like that?" Shiji sat cross-legged on a praying mat. He quietly stared at Do Hua and said, "It's Chinsu who went too far. Not only did he violate the rules of the entrance, but he also played favoritism when Zhuowen was at the last step. He even directly used his strength to bully the weak. What's the point of keeping such scum?" Isn't that tarnishing the reputation of your chaos temple? Even so, he doesn't deserve to die. Moreover, I've already called out to stop him, but you still tried to kill him. Do Hua's gaze was extremely unfriendly as he coldly stared at Shiji, who was seated cross-legged. A terrifying aura surged out from his body. Immediately, the ancestor-level experts sitting cross-legged on the other praying mats all revealed expressions of fear. However, Shiji sneered and said, I only accidentally killed Chinsu earlier. It's a miscarriage of justice. If you're not convinced, then let's fight. Shiji was a renowned expert from the ancient times. He even possessed the terrifying demonic Buddha eyes. Zhuowen had once saved him in the fog whale, and obtained his most powerful immortal technique. In Shiji's heart, Zhuowen could be considered half a disciple of his. Zhuowen was also the only person who was close to him in this unfamiliar central region after 10,000 years. Seeing Zhuowen being bullied by Chensu, Shiji was naturally extremely displeased. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to see Zhuowen's strength, he would have already killed Chensu. Chensu's death and Shiji's attack caused a great commotion in the square. Everyone's gazes were fixed on Zhuowen, and their gazes became extremely fearful. Ji Qingyan's beautiful eyes flickered as she began to carefully size up Zhuowen. Although she knew about the relationship between Zhuowen and Shiji, she never expected that Shiji would go to such an extent for Zhuowen. This degree of favoritism was beyond everyone's expectations. He frowned and sneered in his heart. He was even more certain that the Black Lightning was given to Zhuowen by Shiji. The other representatives of the Saint Talisman clans also had different expressions. No one knew what they were thinking. At this moment, Do Hua had also calmed down. He frowned and stared coldly at Shiji. However, he didn't make a move. After all, the ancient battlefield was about to be opened and Shiji was the key. He didn't want to completely fall out with Shiji now. After a moment of silence, Do Hua said indifferently, since it was an accident, let's forget about this matter. However, I hope that Brother Shi won't be so careless next time. Shiji's eyes flickered as he slowly narrowed his eyes. He nodded faintly and didn't make a sound. Do Hua sighed inwardly. Shiji was an expert from the ancient times and had an unruly character. He didn't consider the opinions of others and did things his own way. Although Shiji's cultivation had declined a lot because he had been trapped in the smoke whale for 10,000 years, he still had the cultivation of a middle-stage genuine immortal. Moreover, Do Hua did not believe that such a famous expert in antiquity times did not have any trump cards. Therefore, unless he had no other choice, Do Hua really didn't want to go against Shiji. Zhuowen, you can go down now. Do Hua's gaze fell on Zhuowen as he said indifferently. Zhuowen cupped his fists and leisurely landed in the group below Yang Yi. His expression was as calm as water. Divine Master, since Chensu is dead and there can't be no one to preside over the entrance, let me continue to preside over the entrance. Suddenly Yang Yi, who was sitting cross-legged on the green qilin, volunteered. However, Do Hua looked at Yang Yi with a complicated expression and nodded. All right, I'll be relieved with you around. I'll leave the rest to you. Yang Yi cupped his fists and leaped to the edge of the celestial pool. He glanced at Zhuowen and immediately continued to preside over the entrance test. The test was still in progress. The representatives of the Saint Talisman clans were basically able to leap to the 30th step and reach the edge of the celestial pool. When the test was over, there were originally 800 people in the square, but now there were only 500 people left. More than 200 people had been eliminated in the first entrance test. The elimination rate was really high. The second test is the Earth test, also known as entering the celestial pool. The celestial pool contains celestial qi that far surpasses the inner hall. The celestial qi is so dense that it almost condenses into liquid celestial qi. However, this celestial pool is not an ordinary celestial pool. This celestial pool is an ancient item passed down by the first divine master of the chaotic divine temple. Countless experts from the ancient times soaked in this celestial pool. Almost every heaven's pride who soaked in the celestial pool for a long time. After a period of time, basically advanced by leaps and bounds in their cultivation, and became a well-known and terrifying existence in ancient times. In that era, Brother Shi should have soaked in the celestial pool, right? At this point, Do Hua turned to look at Shiji, who was resting with his eyes closed, and asked meaningfully. Shiji suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at the celestial pool expressionlessly and said indifferently, "It's really rare that your chaotic divine temple could keep this item until now. It's a pity that this celestial pool is much drier than it was in the ancient times. Even the density and quality of the celestial qi inside is much worse than before." Do Hua smiled faintly and said, "After all, the catastrophe 10,000 years ago was too terrifying. It's already commendable that this celestial pool could be preserved until now. It's basically impossible to restore it to its former glory. However, it's already commendable for the celestial qi that has disappeared." Shiji nodded his head and continued, "This celestial pool has soaked in too many heavens-prided experts. Even after 10,000 years, its pressure is still somewhat difficult to remove. If one is able to endure for 20 breaths in this celestial pool, one can be considered to have passed. 50 breaths is considered good, while 100 breaths is considered excellent." Do Hua nodded when he heard that. After all, Shiji had soaked in the celestial pool in the past, so Shiji's understanding of the celestial pool definitely far surpassed Do Hua's. As a result, Do Hua agreed with Shiji's standards. On the other hand, the ancestors at the heavenly immortal realm, and above who sat on the praying mats in the sky, all opened their eyes. They stared at the celestial pool that was filled with terrifying pressure with interest. At the same time, the gazes of most cultivators in the square fell on the celestial pool and Zhuowen's back. They really wanted to see how Zhuowen, who had made a name for himself in the first stage, would perform in the second stage. As for the heavenly immortal realm ancestors sitting on the praying mats, they began to pay attention to Zhuowen because of Shiji. At the same time, they began to communicate with each other through their divine sense. Although Zhuowen is only at the early stage of the earthly immortal realm, his true strength is probably slightly stronger than his cultivation. He should be able to last 20 breaths in the celestial pool. He might even be able to last 50 breaths. 50 breaths should be very difficult. Among this group of people, I'm afraid only the late stage and peak earthly immortal realm experts can achieve that. As for 100 breaths, it's basically impossible. The pressure at that time is too terrifying. It's far beyond what an earthly immortal can endure. Sitting on one of the praying mats, He Wuxiang sneered. "You think too highly of Zhuowen. It's already commendable for him to last 20 breaths. It's impossible for him to last 50 breaths." Chapter 1780. Traces of the Ancient Era. Brother Wuxiang's words don't make sense. This celestial pond tests one's cultivation. This Zhuowen is indeed strong, but he is only at the early stage of the earth immortal realm. He might not be able to last long in this celestial pond. A skinny old man sitting on a cushion beside He Wuxiang smiled faintly and said slowly. This skinny old man was the ancestor of the Beast Envoy clan Wei Wuyin. He had a good relationship with He Wuxiang, so no one was surprised that he spoke up for He Wuxiang. "You two old farts are very noisy. You can shut up now. If you are not satisfied, you don't have to say it in front of me." Shiji suddenly opened his eyes, and a ray of cold light shot out towards He Wuxiang and Wei Wuyin. The two of them couldn't help but tremble, and immediately shut up. Shiji was an ancient figure, so the two of them were very wary of him. Although they were very angry, they didn't dare to anger Shiji. Those who have been eliminated, leave the square. Those who have passed the entrance will enter the celestial pond. Only those who can last for 20 breaths will pass. Do Hua's voice echoed throughout the sky and earth, turning into rumbling thunder. It also caused the celestial qi in the celestial pond to churn. It was like a wave of 10,000 feet high, rolling wantonly and rushing towards the sky. The moment the celestial qi churned, terrifying phantoms appeared in the celestial pond. At a closer look, these phantoms were all kinds of figures. There were youths, young men, middle-aged men, and even old men. These phantoms were all sitting cross-legged in the celestial pond, as if they were meditating. The moment these phantoms appeared, a terrifying pressure swept across the celestial pond. This pressure was like the might of the heavens, crushing the area around the celestial pond. Many warriors in the square narrowed their eyes. Even though they had not entered the celestial pool, They could still feel the terrifying pressure from the celestial pool from afar. This pressure caused many warriors to be alarmed and their hearts to beat wildly. He coldly snorted. He took a step forward and instantly reached the edge of the celestial pool. Without any hesitation, he took a step forward and directly stepped into the celestial pool. He walked a few dozen steps in the celestial pool before stopping. Soon after, he sat down cross-legged on the spot. All the apertures on his body opened up and began to greedily devour the powerful celestial qi in the surroundings to expand the origin spirit in his dantian. With He taking the lead, the other cultivators also entered the celestial pool. Ji Chunyan from the Everlasting family, Dong Qixin from the Heavy Shield family, Jiangzhe from the Ice Fire family, Wei Rui from the Beast Envoy family, Kong Haogan from the Blood Sacrifice family, and Situ Nianyue from the Revolving Thorn family. Soon after, more and more people entered the celestial pool and sat around it. However, not everyone was able to successfully enter the celestial pool. There were a few warriors who were only in the early stage of the heaven-defying Saint realm. They spat out a mouthful of blood and flew out of the celestial pool after just a few steps. They were disqualified from the battle of the gods. Bai Qing, follow behind me. Zhuowen was not in a hurry to step into the celestial pool. Instead, he said to Bai Qing, who was not far behind him. Bai Qing's luck was pretty good. When he was at the first entrance, he barely managed to step onto the 12th step and luckily advanced. However, the second stage was not simple. Zhuowen knew that with Bai Qing's strength, it was impossible for him to stay in the celestial pool for too long. Hence, he decided to help Bai Qing. Bai Qing's eyes were filled with gratitude. He took a deep breath and nodded at Zhuowen. Zhuowen turned around and slowly walked towards the celestial pool. Bai Qing nervously followed behind Zhuowen. When Zhuowen swept towards the celestial pool, he immediately attracted everyone's attention. However, most of them were in the celestial pool and were trying their best to resist the pressure. They only glanced at Zhuowen and did not pay much attention to him. Instead, they focused on the pressure around them. The moment Zhuowen stepped into the celestial pool, the terrifying pressure crushed down on him like countless mountains. It made Zhuowen's shoulders sink. However, Zhuowen circulated the celestial core power in his body and easily offset the pressure on his shoulders. However, Bai Qing, who was following behind Zhuowen, turned pale the moment he entered the celestial pool. He knelt on the ground with one knee and his breathing quickened. It was obvious that he was struggling to resist the pressure from the celestial pool. Zhuowen waved his sleeves, and surging celestial origin energy surrounded Bai Qing, simultaneously canceling out the pressure around Bai Qing. Shortly after, the celestial origin energy swept Bai Qing into the celestial pool. After about 10 steps into the celestial pool, he brought Bai Qing and sat down. Zhuowen's action naturally attracted the attention of the others on the celestial pool, especially when they saw that Zhuowen had actually brought Bai Qing in. Everyone's eyes were filled with a strange expression. The pressure in the celestial pool was extremely terrifying. One person could barely take care of himself. However, this Zhuowen actually brought another person in. Wasn't this asking for trouble? Young Master Zhuo's action is unwise. Ji Chunyan frowned inside. The disheveled-haired man, Kong Haogan, and Dong Qixin had strange looks in their eyes. As for He Yu and Wei Rui, they were laughing coldly. The beautiful eyes of the Situ clan's woman in black veil, Situ Nianyue, were cold. She didn't even look at Zhuowen. She just sat cross-legged in the celestial pool. In the center of the celestial pool, there are traces left behind by the heavens' prides of the ancient era. The pressure of the celestial pool is emitted from these traces. At the beginning of the celestial pool, every breath that passes, one of the countless phantoms in the center of the celestial pool will walk out and release their own pressure. As time passes, the number of phantoms will increase, and the pressure will become extremely terrifying. If there is anyone who can't hold on halfway, it's best to choose to withdraw. Otherwise, if you insist on holding on, I'm afraid your life will be in danger. Do Hua glanced in the direction of Zhuowen as he spoke. In fact, he was also reminding Zhuowen. However, Zhuowen just sat quietly and didn't make any other movements. He was as still as a rock. Let's begin. Do Hua took a deep look at Zhuo Wen and shouted in a low voice. Immediately, a figure walked out from the center of the celestial pool. The figure took one step at a time, and with each step, the pressure in the celestial pool began to increase rapidly. In the end, the illusory figure leaped into the air and hovered above the celestial pool, looking down at the people sitting cross-legged below. An invisible and terrifying storm swept across the entire celestial pool, causing the pressure to multiply, reaching an extremely terrifying level. The moment the storm swept out, the surrounding immortal energy condensed into extremely sharp and terrifying weapons due to the berserk pressure, and drilled into the bodies of the various martial artists. The faces of the warriors sitting cross-legged changed slightly. They immediately used their own powerful moves to resist the celestial qi that had become sharp due to the pressure. Among them, the ones who had the easiest time resisting the pressure were the representatives of the sacred talisman clans, and some veteran experts whose cultivation had reached the late stage of the earth immortal realm. The most eye-catching one was Ji Chenyan. Countless white lotus flowers bloomed around Ji Chenyan. In the center of each white lotus flower stamen, a flawless white arm stretched out. The arm stretched out like 1,000-hand guanyin, and enveloped Ji Chenyan's slender figure. They formed a powerful defense that blocked the sharp celestial qi weapons formed by the pressure. Other than Ji Chenyan, countless illusory weapons flashed around Hiyu. Kong Haogan formed a ring of defense with his blood and qi. The other representatives of the Saint Talisman clan also used their own powerful defenses. It was quite easy for them to resist the pressure. On the other hand, Zhuo Wen narrowed his eyes and pointed at the void with his right hand. Instantly, the massacre underworld finger was used. A huge underworld river surrounded Zhuo Wen and turned into the toughest defense. Of course, since Bai Qing was beside him, he still had to divide a part of the underworld spring water droplets to envelop Bai Qing. In the second breath, another shadow walked out from the center of the celestial pool and leaped into the air above the celestial pool. Suddenly, the entire celestial pool shook, and the pressure became even more terrifying. The surrounding cultivators trembled because of the sudden increase in pressure. Then the third breath, the fourth breath, until the 10th breath. There were already 10 shadows sitting cross-legged above the celestial pool. At this moment, the pressure of the celestial pool had reached a terrifying level. The entire celestial pool set off a terrifying storm. The surrounding space even faintly showed traces of cracks. Puff! Suddenly, a warrior spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale and bloodless. He flew out and crashed heavily outside the celestial pool. His eyes were filled with despair. He knew he had been eliminated. In the 11th breath, a few more warriors flew out because they could not withstand the pressure. In the 12th breath, the 13th breath, until the 19th breath, the pressure of the celestial pool had reached a shocking level. The surrounding liquid celestial qi set off waves that were tens of thousands of feet high. It was like an angry dragon that constantly slapped the warriors in the celestial pool. At this moment, there were only about 400 warriors left in the celestial pool. Before this, the pressure of the celestial pool had already eliminated more than 100 people. The elimination rate was not low. In the 20th breath, in the center of the celestial pool, the shadow of a handsome young man walked out slowly. The young man's eyes were cold. His black robe fluttered and his long hair danced wantonly. His temperament was otherworldly. When the young man's shadow flew above the celestial pool, the entire celestial pool boiled. The celestial qi around the celestial pool began to sweep violently. The liquid celestial qi in the celestial pool formed a huge whirlpool. In these whirlpools, a dragon's roar could be heard. Some of the warriors around the whirlpools could not withstand the strong tearing force of the whirlpools, and were directly thrown out of the celestial pool. Howl! Chapter 1781. 40 breaths. As soon as the 10 white dragons were formed, they swooped down and circled around the celestial pool. They did not consider the feelings of the many warriors in the celestial pool. The impact of the 10 dragons was simply too powerful. Immediately, more than 20 cultivators turned pale and were swept away, losing their qualifications to enter the celestial pool. There were still 380 cultivators in the celestial pool. These cultivators were the cream of the crop among the 800 cultivators. They could be called the elites of the elites. At this moment, they were barely resisting the attacks of the 10 giant dragons. Even Ji Chenyan, Kong Haoqian, and the other representatives of the sacred rune clans began to use all their skills to seriously deal with the impact of the 10 dragons. Bang! 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 At this moment, the whirlpool defense formed by countless underworld water droplets around Zhuowen was constantly emitting explosive sounds. The number of underworld water droplets around him was constantly decreasing. Bai Qing, who was beside Zhuowen, was pale. The 10 white dragons around him were too terrifying. He knew very well that if he was alone outside, he would not be able to withstand a single blow. He might even lose his life because of it. The pressure at this moment was too terrifying. It was enough to crush him to death. Lord Zhuo, have I implicated you? Why don't you send me out? That way you can relax a little, Bai Qing said guiltily. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. He said indifferently, no need. I said that I would help you advance. Naturally, I will keep my word. With that, Zhuowen pointed his right hand again. At this moment, he was no longer using the massacre finger of Netherworld. Instead, he used the devouring curse to open a teleportation formation. In the void behind Zhuowen, even more Yellow Springs water droplets appeared. Moreover, the amount of Yellow Springs water droplets in the teleportation array far exceeded the amount of Yellow Springs water droplets on Zhuowen's body. Needless to say, these underworld water droplets were temporarily collected by Zhuowen from the Qin Tian tribe in the inner world of the Luoyan whale. It had been a long time since the last time he used the Qin Tian tribe's Yellow Springs water droplets. It was obvious that the Qin Tian tribe had developed rapidly during this period of time. They actually had so many Yellow Springs water droplets in one go. The water droplets from the Yellow Springs kept converging, forming a Yellow Springs that spanned thousands of li around Zhuowen. The Yellow Springs kept swirling around Zhuowen, forming a terrifyingly powerful defense. The Yellow Spring defense, which was originally on the verge of collapse under the impact of the 10 white dragons, was strengthened by hundreds and thousands of times after receiving the support of such a large amount of Yellow Spring water droplets. It managed to block the powerful impact. The 10 white dragons roared and wreaked havoc. Then they slowly dissipated. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and pushed Bai Qing out of the celestial pool. He clearly knew that the pressure from the celestial pond would only grow stronger. It would not do him any good if he continued to bring Bai Qing with him. After all, Bai Qing had already lasted 20 breaths with his help. She had barely passed the test. Not only Bai Qing, all the warriors below the celestial realm in the celestial pool got up and left the celestial pool. These warriors knew their limits. Under the pressure of the 20th breath, they were barely able to resist, let alone the terrifying pressure that was coming. One by one, the warriors left the celestial pool. Then, only the Earth Immortal Realm experts and above were left in the celestial pool. There were nearly 100 of them. These warriors silently sat cross-legged on the spot, constantly absorbing the surging immortal qi in the celestial pool. The immortal qi in the celestial pool was too rich. It had unimaginable benefits for the Earth Immortals. Naturally, they would not leave so easily. After all, staying in the celestial pool for a moment was equivalent to cultivating for years or even decades. How could they easily give up such a rare opportunity? Those warriors who left the celestial pool and landed in the square all looked at the Earth Immortal experts who were still sitting cross-legged in the celestial pool with envy. The 10 enormous white dragons dissipated, and the youth with the indifferent gaze sat cross-legged in the sky with his eyes slightly closed and motionless. At the 21st breath, the figure of a man with an extremely magnificent figure flashed out from the center of the celestial pool. As soon as this person appeared, countless lightning silhouettes exploded like a myriad of serpents, and they densely enveloped the entire celestial pool. Within the celestial pool, countless extremely terrifying whirlpools swept out. The pupils of many Earth Immortal experts constricted, and their bodies shook violently. They had no choice but to use their immortal arts to resist the terrifying whirlpools. As time gradually passed, the initial stage Earth Immortal experts in the celestial pool started to be unable to withstand the increasingly terrifying pressure. and they had no choice but to take the initiative to leave the celestial pool. Among them, Shui Hui and Old Man Ju, who had a good relationship with Zhuan, took the initiative to leave at the 24th breath. He slowly opened his eyes, and his gaze was icy cold as he stared at the nearby Zhuan with an extremely hostile expression. At the same time, it was accompanied by a wisp of surprise because he never imagined that Zhuan would actually be able to persist until now. Zhuan sat cross-legged with a tranquil gaze, and the enormous nether springs in his surroundings started to revolve around him. Countless vengeful spirits ceaselessly appeared within the nether springs, and it formed a scene that seemed like a cycle of reincarnation to resist the pressure that crushed down from the surroundings. At the 30th breath, the figure of an old man with a sage-like bearing walked out from the center of the celestial pool. This old Taoist waved the horsetail whisk in his right hand, and then the pressure of the entire celestial pool actually transformed into shapeless ripples. These ripples started to revolve violently and formed numerous terrifying whirlpools. There were truly too many whirlpools, and they were like maggots that attached themselves to the surface of everyone. Especially the whirlpools that possessed an extremely terrifying sharp penetrative force that caused the immortal arts of many Earth immortal experts to be on the verge of collapse. Bang! 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 Continuous muffled groans were heard, and immediately after, more than 10 Earth immortal experts in the celestial pool could not resist the terrifying whirlpool power, and they had no choice but to give up and leave the celestial pool. At this moment, there were still 50 figures left in the celestial pool. Except for one early-stage Earth Immortal expert, the rest were all mid-stage Earth Immortal experts and above, and the only early-stage Earth Immortal expert naturally included Zhuan. This kid's immortal art is not simple. The defense does not seem strong, but it has the effect of triggering a chain reaction. If the nether springs were not completely destroyed in an instant, then the nether springs would be continuously reborn, forming an extremely tough defense. Do Hua's eyes were like torches, and he quickly noticed the nether springs around Zhuan. At the 30th breath, the countless whirlpools formed by the pressure of the nether springs were too terrifying. More than half of the nether springs around Zhuan had been destroyed, but the strange thing was that the nether springs was rapidly recovering at the same time as it was destroyed. With Do Hua's level, he naturally guessed some of the characteristics of Zhuan's nether springs massacre. On the other hand, Shiji nodded repeatedly. He was the only one here who knew the origin of the Nether Springs massacre. He knew very well how terrifying the potential of the Nether Springs massacre was. It was commendable that Zhuan could cultivate it to such a level. Looking at the Nether Springs massacre around Zhuan, Shiji could not help but recall the heroic figure of Taoist Songlong in the primordial age. At that time, Taoist Songlong's Nether Springs massacre was extremely powerful and terrifying. With a point of his finger, the Nether Springs gushed out, reaching the 9 heavens and the 9 underworlds. It was extremely impressive. At the 39th breath, there were only 30 people left in the celestial pool. At this moment, there were very few people in the celestial pool. At the 40th breath, a burly shadow clad in armor walked over step by step. The moment the shadow stepped over, countless murderous auras gushed out from its body. It was as if it was not a person walking over, but a peerless sword that had experienced endless slaughter. In an instant, the pressure of the celestial pool doubled again. And this time, the pressure was filled with a terrifying murderous aura. It was as if the celestial pool had turned into a terrifying battlefield of slaughter. Under the influence of the armored shadow, the surrounding pressure began to wriggle, turning into countless densely packed sword shadows. Each sword shadow was filled with an unimaginable murderous aura, and a terrifying pressure that was heavier than Mount Tai. Zhuan's pupils shrank. Then, he saw the sword shadows that were formed by the pressure sweeping around him. Under the influence of these sword shadows, the defense formed by the Nether Springs massacre collapsed into nothingness. As the sword shadows were too powerful, and there were too many of them, the yellow spring that spanned over a few thousand li collapsed in just a single breath's time. Swoosh! Zhuan's eyes narrowed slightly. He stomped his right foot and retreated explosively. On the other hand, the sword shadows were like maggots that flashed towards Zhuan and closed in on him step by step. Celestial technique, Lone Peak. Zhuan flicked his sleeve. Instantly, Celestial energy suffused the air, and a lone peak descended from the sky and stood before him. Bang! 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 However, the pressure of the sword shadows was too powerful. As soon as the lone peak appeared, it was instantly pierced full of holes by the pressure of the sword shadows, and it was on the verge of collapse. Zhuowen's gaze was ghastly cold. He pointed at the void with his right hand and executed the devouring curse seal. Countless seals formed innumerable seal marks on the surface of the lone peak. The terrifying sealing force even sealed the lone peak, causing its defense to reach the limit. For a time, Zhuowen relied on the lone peak and the devouring curse seal to barely resist this wave of terrifying pressure. On the other hand, the other earthly immortal realm experts were naturally forced into a rather sorry state by this terrifying pressure. Amongst them, there were even 20 people who were caught off guard and were directly forced back by the pressure of the sword shadows. They had no choice but to withdraw from the celestial pool. At this moment, besides Zhuowen, there were only 9 people left in the celestial pool. Moreover, he wasn't unfamiliar with 7 of them. They were respectively He Yu, Wei Rui, Ji Chenyan, Kong Haogan, Dong Qixin, Jiang Zhe, and Situ Ninyue. The other 2 were old men with white hair and beards. Their cultivations were extremely unfathomable, and their auras were even vast. They'd actually reached the peak of the earthly immortal realm, and weren't much weaker than Chen Su, who was killed by Shi Ji. No wonder these 2 old men were able to persist until now. This kid actually persisted until the 40th breath. This fellow. Chapter 1782. Halberd Shadow. The 10 figures in the celestial pool were the most elite and powerful representatives in this war of the gods. Especially the 2 peak earthly immortal realm elders. They were extremely powerful and not simple. 41st breath, 42nd breath. Until the 44th breath, He Yu roared and the countless weapon shadows around him began to collapse. His face was as pale as a sheet. I've reached my limit. He Yu's eyes were filled with bitterness. Then he looked at Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged not far away. He couldn't figure out how Zhuowen could hold on until now. Bang! 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 The weapon shadows around He Yu collapsed one after another. He Yu sighed and jumped out of the celestial pool. Even though he was unwilling, there was nothing he could do. The moment He Yu left, Dong Qixin, who was sitting cross-legged not far away, groaned. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He had no choice but to leave the celestial pool. Obviously, he had also reached his limit. At this moment, there were only 8 people left in the celestial pool. At the 45th breath, the entire celestial pool began to boil. Immortal Qi soared into the sky and turned into white pillars. The pressure within formed a terrifying force. Suddenly, 2 more people couldn't withstand the pressure and were thrown out of the celestial pool. They were Situ Ninyue and Jiang Zhe from the Ice Fire clan. At the 46th breath, Wei Rui from the Beast Envoy clan reached his limit and was forced to leave the celestial pool. At the 47th breath, Kong Haogan from the Blood Sacrifice clan stood up and left the celestial pool. Now there were only 4 figures left in the celestial pool. They were Zhuowen, Ji Chenyan, and the 2 peak earth immortal elders. Zhuowen, in particular, attracted the attention of most of the warriors. After all, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the early stage of the earth immortal realm. Most of the middle stage and late stage earth immortal realm warriors had already left the celestial pool. But he was still persevering, showing no signs of being unable to bear it. At this moment, Ji Chenyan's forehead was dripping with sweat. Her beautiful eyes pierced through the layers of immortal qi and fell on Zhuowen. She bit her lower lip, showing a trace of shock and dissatisfaction. Although she knew that Zhuowen's strength was not bad, his cultivation was still lower than hers, so his strength would definitely be weaker than hers. Therefore, she believed that Zhuowen would definitely be eliminated before her in this celestial pool battle. However, he did not expect Zhuowen to be able to persist until now. Moreover, from the looks of it, he was far from reaching his limit. Zhuowen sat cross-legged. His right hand was constantly thrusting with the devouring curse seal. The seal formed by the seals grew stronger and stronger, revolving around him and forming an extremely powerful defense. Zhuo Wen's Devour curse had reached great mastery, and at this moment, he was using the number of curse seals to obtain a powerful defense. He was barely able to cope with the increasingly powerful pressure around him. Moreover, Zhuo Wen discovered that as he continued to use the Devouring curse to gain defense, his understanding and usage of the Devouring curse became more and more proficient. Although his Devouring was complete, it hadn't been long. His understanding of the Devouring hadn't reached a very deep level. Now he had no choice but to use the Devouring because of the strong external pressure. Naturally, Zhuo Wen had a deeper understanding of the Devouring. At the 48th breath, the pressure swept over like a strong storm. Ji Qinyan's face turned pale, but she gritted her teeth and bit the tip of her tongue. She spat out a mouthful of blood essence on the white lotus around her. Immediately, the white lotus turned into a blood lotus. Its aura skyrocketed and barely blocked the terrifying pressure. Meanwhile, the other two Peak Earth Immortal Realm old men frowned slightly. Their figures shuddered slightly, but they did not show any unusual reaction. At the 49th breath, the pressure reached a terrifying level. Even the two Peak Earth Immortal Realm Elders began to use their powerful immortal techniques to resist the pressure. Ji Qinyan's beautiful eyes were filled with determination. She pushed out her jade-like palm, and surging immortal essence rushed out without any regard for her life. The blood lotus around Ji Qinyan bloomed to the extreme, barely blocking the pressure of the 49th breath. Zhuo Wen narrowed his eyes. The pressure from the surroundings had already caused countless cracks to appear on the mountain. Even though there were many runes flickering on the surface of the mountain, and a powerful sealing force resisting the pressure, it was still useless. The peak won't last the 50th breath. Zhuo Wen's eyes flickered as he murmured. Just as he finished speaking, the 50th breath had arrived. At the center of the celestial pond, an extraordinarily powerful middle-aged man slowly walked out. He had a halberd on his back, and when he opened and closed his eyes, a terrifying light shot out. This person was definitely a terrifying expert when he was alive. The figure flew above the celestial pond, and pulled out the large halberd from his back. Then, with a twist of his right wrist, the large halberd shot out like a spiral. The moment it shot out, the large halberd split into 4 terrifying halberd shadows, and flew towards the 4 people in the celestial pond. In the celestial pond, there were only 2 Peak Earth Immortal Realm Elders. One of them, a blue-robed elder, stood up abruptly with cold eyes. This elder's name was Pan Fei, a rogue cultivator of the central region. He had cultivated for thousands of years, but he was still at the peak of the Earth Immortal Realm. This time, he participated in the Divinity War with the intention of entering the Antiquity battlefield, hoping to obtain an opportunity to break through to the Heaven Immortal Realm. Once he broke through to the Heaven Immortal Realm, he would be an Ancestor Realm expert. By then, he would establish his own sect and countless people would come to join him. Pan Fei leaped up and formed a claw with his right hand. He grabbed at the void and said in a deep voice, "Immortal technique, Beast Claw." As soon as he said that, the void above Pan Fei collapsed. Then, a furry beast claw that was hundreds of feet long descended from the sky and grabbed at the halberd shadow. Bang! 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 The beast claw and the halberd shadow collided, creating terrifying ripples. Then, the halberd shadow and beast claw shattered at the same time. Pan Fei let out a groan and took a few steps back, barely managing to withstand the pressure. The other Peak Earth Immortal Realm Elder was called Sherbin. However, the difference was that he was not a rogue cultivator, but an expert of the Eternity family. At this moment, he saw the halberd shadow that was chasing after Ji Qinyan. He took a step forward with his right foot and flew towards Ji Qinyan. "Miss, leave this halberd shadow to me." Sherbin came before Ji Qinyan and said in a deep voice. Then he punched out. The moment he punched out, countless dragon roars could be heard. Flood Dragon Fist. A surge of immortal core power gathered on Sherbin's right fist, raising his aura to the extreme. Then he punched out with his right fist. The wind howled and formed a huge flood dragon shadow. Bang! When the fist landed on the halberd shadow, an ear-piercing buzzing sound was heard. Then the halberd shadow collapsed. However, the powerful recoil caused Sherbin to let out a groan, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Swoosh! The moment Sherbin destroyed the halberd shadow in front of Ji Chenyan, the halberd shadow that was flying towards Sherbin changed its direction and flew towards Sherbin's vitals at a tricky angle. "Elder Sher, be careful!" Ji Chenyan cried out in alarm. Sherbin's eyes darkened. The halberd shadow's angle was too tricky and its speed was too fast. Therefore, Sherbin could only try his best to avoid hitting his vitals. Pooch! The halberd shadow was extremely fast. In an instant, it pierced through the left side of Sherbin's chest. A trace of blood spurted out. Then, Sherbin was sent flying by the powerful recoil and was pushed out of the celestial pond. "Elder Sher!" Ji Chenyan clenched her teeth. There was a trace of guilt in her beautiful eyes. She knew that with Sherbin's strength, it was more than enough for him to withstand the pressure of the 50th breath. However, because of her, he had to withstand 2 halberd shadows and was forced out of the competition. Pan Fei glanced at Sherbin, who was sent flying. He shook his head and did not say anything. Instead, he sat cross-legged in the celestial pond and frantically absorbed the celestial qi to heal his internal injuries. At this moment, Zhuowen was in a rather sorry state. The halberd shadow was extremely fast. In an instant it landed on the lone peak. Immediately, the lone peak was shattered into pieces. Even though there were many seals on the surface of the lone peak, it was still shattered. Whoosh! The moment the lone peak was shattered, the halberd shadow was like an unbridled shuttle. It instantly cut across the sky and blasted towards the space between Zhuowen's eyebrows. Its speed was almost faster than teleportation. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. With a stomp of his right foot, an invisible ripple spread out from his feet. Then he slowly disappeared. The halberd shadow shuttled through Zhuowen's shadow and pounced on empty air. This feeling again. What kind of move is this? Do Hua narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhuowen, who had disappeared, with some astonishment. At this moment, Zhuowen's aura was extremely weak. In his eyes, Zhuowen's speed was extremely fast, reaching the stage of teleportation. This speed was already comparable to a celestial immortal. It was extremely inconceivable for a mere Earth-stage earthly immortal to achieve such speed. Several hundred meters away from the halberd shadow, Zhuowen's figure appeared again. The lightning wings on his back were unfolded and filled with extremely terrifying lightning. Just now, the reason why his speed was so fast was mainly because he had used the half-step Dao intent. By using the half-step Dao intent on the lightning wings, Zhuowen's speed reached an unprecedented height. It was not much slower than a celestial immortal's teleportation. So fast. Pan Fei and Ji Chenyan, who were still in the celestial pool, naturally saw the scene just now. Both of them were horrified. Zhuowen's speed was so fast that it was almost beyond their reach. This speed should not appear on an Earth-stage earthly immortal. Even Pan Fei, who was at the peak of the earthly immortal realm, felt ashamed of his inferiority after seeing Zhuowen's speed. Whoosh! However, the moment Zhuowen dodged the halberd shadow seemed to have a mind of its own. It suddenly changed its direction and rushed towards Zhuowen again at an even faster speed. Chapter 1783. The Last Man. Bang! 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 The instant Zhuowen's fingertips landed on the halberd shadow, the surface of the halberd shadow emitted a dull sound. Soon after, Zhuowen felt a numbing sensation coming from the fingertips of his right hand. An invisible force flowed through his right hand and into his entire body. The rebounding force was extremely strong. If it was an ordinary early-stage Earth immortal, the rebounding force would have turned him into dust. However, Zhuowen had cultivated the indestructible divine body of Myriad Tao, which had raised his realm to the level of a lesser perfection divine body. His strong physical body was able to withstand the force of the recoil. Whoosh! The halberd shadow changed its direction once more and flashed straight towards Zhuowen's heart, whereas Zhuowen's entire body slowly vanished in the sky under the boost of his Dao insight, causing the halberd shadow to miss once more, whereas Zhuowen once again appeared behind the halberd shadow before pointing out with his finger once more. Just like this, Zhuowen relied on the terrifying speed enhanced by his Dao insight to avoid the pursuit of the halberd images time and time again, and he instead took a counterattacking stance and utilized the endless continuous force of the nether spring finger to blast the halberd images. Zhuowen's speed was so fast that Pan Fei and Ji Qinyan, who were in the celestial pool, could not see Zhuowen's figure clearly. Many people in the square were also unable to catch up with Zhuowen's speed. Only the more than 10 ancestor-level existences, sitting cross-legged on the futon, could catch sight of Zhuowen's figure. Bang, bang, bang. After dozens of exchanges, the surface of the halberd shadow became dimmer and was on the verge of collapse. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes were like bolts of lightning. He pointed with his right hand at the halberd, and then a series of muffled sounds resounded from the halberd. Then the halberd collapsed from the tip to the end. After doing all this, Zhuowen slowly descended onto the celestial pond, completely ignoring the astonished gazes of the surrounding people. He opened his mouth and inhaled like a giant whale inhaling water, swallowing and exhaling the surging celestial qi in the surroundings, using this to heal the injuries caused by the halberd shadows. Pan Fei stared at Zhuowen with fear in his eyes. Zhuowen's attack didn't seem very strong to him, but the speed that Zhuowen displayed just now made him extremely fearful. Zhuowen's speed far surpassed his own. Ji Qinyan's beautiful eyes were complicated. She looked at Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged, and her heart was filled with shock. 3 people have persisted to the 50th breath. Dohua nodded slightly, his eyes filled with admiration. At the same time, 2 figures stood quietly at the entrance of the central divine palace below Dohua. Due to the powerful restriction placed at the entrance of the hall, and the fact that everyone's attention was on the battle of the gods, no one noticed the 2 figures at the entrance of the hall. Zhuowen was no stranger to these 2 figures. They were Yuan Hongwen and Hao Bo, who had entered the 3rd floor of the Crystal Tower in the Celestial Market. At this moment, Yuan Hongwen had his hands behind his back. His eyes were like torches as they fell on Ji Qinyan. He nodded with satisfaction and said, "Qinyan's improvement is really fast. She can actually persist to the 50th breath." Hao Bo's eyes were cold. His gaze fell on Zhuowen and he said in a low voice, "Young master, Zhuowen has also persisted to the 50th breath. This boy is really not simple, especially the speed he displayed just now." Yuan Hongwen pondered and said lightly, "This boy has indeed exceeded my expectations, especially his speed. He can look down on the world among the earthly immortals. However, in terms of strength, he is not good. He can't last more than 60 breaths." Hao Bo nodded. He had no objection to Yuan Hongwen's judgment. It could be said that he trusted Yuan Hongwen completely. It was not without reason that Yuan Hongwen was called the God's Child from the heavens, and was treated with great importance by the Chaos Divine Master, Dohua. At the 51st breath, the pressure rolled over like a tidal wave. Ji Qinyan's beautiful eyes changed slightly. She looked at Zhuowen, who was not far away, and gritted her teeth. The moment she came into contact with the pressure, her body trembled and her face turned pale. She was on the verge of collapse. Sighing softly, Ji Qinyan took a step and left the celestial pool. At this moment, there were only 2 people left in the celestial pool. They were the peak earthly immortal Pan Fei, and the early earthly immortal Zhuowen. This boy can still persist, damn it. Hiyu's eyes were gloomy to the extreme. His heart was burning with jealousy. He was extremely unhappy that Zhuowen could persist until now. Of course, there was even more fear in Hiyu's heart. Since Zhuowen's cultivation advanced to the initial stage of the earthly immortal realm, Zhuowen's strength seemed to have undergone a transformation. He had actually become so formidable, and the thing he feared the most was Zhuowen's speed. Not only Hiyu, but the other representatives of the Saint Talisman clan, such as Kong Haogan, Wei Rui, Situ Nianyue and the others, also showed fear. They began to secretly pay attention to Zhuowen. Among this group of people, the one who felt the most unbalanced was Jiangzhe of the Icefire clan. At this moment, Jiangzhe's gaze was fixed on Zhuowen. His heart was filled with complicated resentment. He had never thought that this boy, who was only at the minor Sun Heavenly Saint realm back then, was just an ant that he could casually crush. In this short period of time, this boy's cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds. He had actually triumphantly advanced all the way to the early earthly immortal realm. Not only that, this boy's strength was unfathomable, to the point that Jiangzhe couldn't see through him. Originally, Jiangzhe had planned to completely eliminate Zhuowen at the end of the divine battle. But now, it seemed that whether he could kill Zhuowen was full of uncertainty. At this moment, the pressure of the 51st breath surged over, turning into an invisible tide that crashed into the celestial pond and slammed into the bodies of the only two people left. Pan Fei's eyes were solemn. He roared angrily and once again used the beast claw technique. The huge beast claw grabbed Pan Fei's entire body, resisting the terrifying pressure that was surging over. Zhuowen's eyes were solemn. In the face of this tide-like pressure, his speed no longer had any advantage. He could only resist it head-on. This boy seems to have reached his limit. Under this pressure, his speed no longer has any advantage. He sneered. The other people in the square also nodded in agreement. Zhuowen's attack power wasn't particularly strong. His only advantage was his terrifying speed. Since speed was no longer useful, Zhuowen had lost his only advantage. Zhuowen stood quietly staring at the invisible tide that was surging over. Then he put his palms together, and an extremely terrifying golden light erupted from his body. Immortal art asks Buddha. I ask Buddha. A world in a flower, a Buddha in a leaf, a Bodhi in a Zen. A solemn voice slowly recited from Zhuowen's mouth. Then a terrifying Buddha light soared into the sky, enveloping Zhuowen's entire body. This Buddha light shrouded the void, and finally revealed a huge ancient Buddha shadow sitting in the void. Zhuowen stepped forward and came in front of the ancient Buddha shadow. A huge Bodhi tree bloomed in front of the ancient Buddha shadow. Zhuowen came to the Bodhi tree, sat down cross-legged, and chanted a complicated scripture in a state of enlightenment. Golden scriptures were spat out from Zhuowen's mouth. Like a long snake, they circled around the ancient Buddha shadow, forming an extremely strong defense. Boom, boom, boom. The moment the ancient Buddha shadow was formed, a tidal wave of pressure came crashing down on the ancient Buddha shadow, producing endless sounds of explosions. When the ancient Buddha shadow sat down cross-legged and chanted silently, it was motionless like a mountain. It wasn't affected by the tidal wave of pressure at all. Zhuowen had often consulted Shiji about his immortal art asks Buddha and demon transformations. Through Shiji's teachings, he had a qualitative understanding of the asks Buddha and demon transformations. In addition, his cultivation base had reached the early stage of the Earth Immortal Realm. At this moment, the asks Buddha he displayed was much more powerful than before. He blocked it. Everyone in the square was in an uproar when they saw the ancient Buddha silhouette sitting in the void. No one had expected that Zhuowen would actually possess such a terrifying and powerful immortal technique. Dohua squinted his eyes and took a deep look at Shiji. He had seen Shiji use this immortal art asks Buddha and demon transformations before. It was Shiji's famous immortal art, and also his strongest immortal art. Since Shiji was willing to impart such a powerful immortal art to Zhuowen, one could see that Shiji really treated Zhuowen as his successor. 52nd breath. 53rd breath. The experts in the center of the immortal pool were still stepping out one by one. As the number of experts stepping out increased, the pressure became stronger and more bizarre. At the 60th breath, the pressure in the immortal pool had reached an extremely terrifying level. Even if it was a late-stage Earth Immortal Realm expert, if he were to be in the immortal pool, his physical body would probably be crushed by the pressure. Pan Fei's face was pale. The beast claws surrounding him had collapsed. He spat out a mouthful of blood and had no choice but to withdraw from the immortal pool. However, his harvest this time was not small. He had stayed in the celestial pool for 60 breaths of time. The amount of celestial qi he had absorbed was enough to match his previous 60 years of cultivation. This was an extremely terrifying ratio. The moment Pan Fei withdrew, the huge ancient Buddha shadow that Zhuowen was sitting cross-legged on began to tremble violently. Fine cracks appeared on its surface. At the entrance of the central divine palace, Hao Bo's pupils shrank as he looked at the cracks on the surface of the ancient Buddha shadow. He couldn't help but praise Yuan Hongwen. Young master's prediction is indeed godlike. This kid's limit is indeed 60 breaths. It seems that in this war of the gods, there is no one like you who can last for 100 breaths in the immortal pool. Yuan Hongwen clasped his hands behind his back. He gazed indifferently at Zhuowen who was in the immortal pool below and said, It's commendable that this kid could last for 60 breaths. If I'm not wrong, the immortal chi he absorbed during these 60 breaths will probably allow him to advance to the mid-stage Earth immortal realm. Haobo nodded. The benefits of the immortal pool were well known. It could greatly increase the chances of a breakthrough. With Zhuowen's comprehension, it was really possible for him to break through to the late-stage Earth immortal realm. Under the Bodhi tree, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was like a torch that pierced through the lush Bodhi leaves and fell on the cracked ancient Buddha shadow above. Can't hold on any longer? Zhuowen mumbled in a low voice. His right hand formed a seal, and a formless ripple spread out. At this moment, he had used his will of the way. Suddenly, the ancient Buddha's light shone brightly, and it climbed to another peak. The cracks on the surface of the ancient Buddha shadow were also slowly healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Haobo immediately noticed this scene. He opened his mouth slightly and looked at Yuan Hongwen. Chapter 1784. In the center of the celestial pool, this kid's immortal technique has strengthened again? Yuan Hongwen frowned slightly. His gaze was fixed on Zhuowen, who was under the Bodhi tree. In that instant just now, when the ancient Buddha was about to shatter, a strange energy spread out from Zhuowen's body. It was precisely by relying on this strange energy that the ancient Buddha's power instantly rose to the limit. Then it blocked the terrifying tide-like pressure. Moreover, Yuan Hongwen also discovered that this strange energy that had suddenly appeared was similar to the strange energy that had caused Zhuowen's speed to explosively increase. This caused Yuan Hongwen's eyes to narrow slightly. When Zhuowen withstood the pressure for 60 breaths, everyone in the square was in an uproar. Even Pan Fei sighed as he stared at Zhuowen, who was still sitting cross-legged in the celestial pool, with a complicated expression. In 60 breaths of time, the immortal essence in my body is constantly accumulating and expanding under the effect of the immortal energy in the celestial pool. I'm afraid I'm not far from the intermediate stage of the earthly immortal stage. Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the celestial pool as he muttered to himself with a burning gaze. After experiencing the enormous benefits of the celestial pond, Zhuowen knew that the longer he stayed in the celestial pond, the faster his cultivation speed would be. Therefore, if he had no other choice, Zhuowen would not easily leave the celestial pond. As time gradually passed, the pressure in the celestial pool became more and more terrifying. The number of phantoms that flew above the celestial pool also slowly increased. After being supported by the Tao intent, the power of the immortal technique asked the Buddha had increased by too much. It was actually able to resist the invasion of this terrifying pressure. When it reached the 70th breath, even though the ancient Buddha was supported by the Tao intent, it was still at the end of its rope. Traces of cracks began to appear on its surface, and these cracks became denser and denser. In the end, the entire ancient Buddha was enveloped in it. Countless cracks also began to appear on the surface of the Bodhi tree below the ancient Buddha. Zhuowen slowly stood up. His gaze fell on the cracks on the surface of the ancient Buddha, and he frowned slightly. Have I reached my limit? As soon as Zhuowen finished speaking, the ancient Buddha silhouette suddenly collapsed, bursting into countless golden lights. Then, a terrifying pressure surged out like a tidal wave, instantly enveloping Zhuowen. It seems that Zhuowen has reached his limit. Everyone in the square heaved a sigh of relief. It was already inconceivable that Zhuowen, an early-stage earthly immortal, could hold on for 70 breaths of time. If Zhuowen continued to hold on, it would be really hard for them to accept. Crash. The pressure surged over like a tidal wave, instantly drowning Zhuowen. The moment the pressure drowned Zhuowen, his body began to emit an extremely blazing dark golden light. 9 golden patterns began to surge out of his body and rapidly revolved around his body in an irregular manner. At this moment, Zhuowen displayed his perfection saint body. When the tidal wave of pressure faded away, Zhuowen's figure, who was sitting cross-legged, quietly sat on the celestial pool motionless. I can feel that if I have a little more time, I will be able to break through to the middle stage of the earthly immortal realm. Zhuowen's eyes flashed with a hint of passion. He did not hesitate to display his perfection saint body to continue holding on. hoping to smoothly advance to the middle stage of the earthly immortal realm. 71st breath, 72nd breath. Until the 75th breath, Zhuowen's aura suddenly rose sharply, as if there was a terrifying prehistoric beast hidden in his body at this moment. When this aura rose to the extreme, Zhuowen suddenly stood up. Around his body, countless celestial core power manifested, creating an extremely terrifying and violent storm of celestial core power. At the same time, the pressure of the 76th breath filled the air, causing the entire celestial pool to be engulfed in a terrifying pressure. However, Zhuowen was not afraid. Following the soaring aura, he stomped his right foot. Suddenly, the terrifying pressure was completely annihilated by his aura. He broke through. He broke through to the middle stage of the earthly immortal realm. At the instant Zhuowen used the powerful aura produced by his breakthrough to cancel out the pressure of the 76th breath, the square once again burst into an uproar. However, the expressions of He Yu and Jiangxia, who had some grudges with Zhuowen, became extremely ugly. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes were full of excitement. The benefits of the celestial pool were too great. It actually allowed him to directly break through to the middle stage of the earthly immortal realm. If he cultivated according to normal standards, he was afraid that he would need at least dozens of years to cultivate. After Zhuowen broke through, the pressure of the 77th breath began to rise. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He looked at the monstrous pressure that rose to the sky. He knew that with his current cultivation, it would be difficult for him to resist the pressure of the 77th breath. Since he had achieved his goal of breaking through to the middle stage of the earthly immortal realm, he naturally did not need to ask for trouble and face an even more terrifying pressure. However, just as he was about to leave the celestial pool, he suddenly felt a pain between his eyebrows. Then his whole body shook. In his sea of consciousness, the Fushi cauldron, which was originally motionless, suddenly moved. The Fushi cauldron has recovered. Zhuowen was extremely surprised and felt extremely bitter. The Fushi cauldron had not recovered earlier or later. It just had to recover now. This caused him to be in deep trouble. Whoosh. At this moment, the pressure of the 77th breath attacked Zhuowen in an instant. It swept Zhuowen's entire body into the pressure. Soon Zhuowen's figure was submerged in the pressure. Naturally, Zhuowen's abnormal state was clearly seen by everyone. No one expected that Zhuowen would pause when he was about to leave. This kid was hit directly by the pressure of the 77th breath. I'm afraid he will be seriously injured. Pan Fei shook his head. He did not understand why Zhuowen had paused and missed the best opportunity to leave the celestial pool. This kid deserves it. He Yu and Jiangxia sneered. They wished that Zhuowen would die under the pressure of the celestial pool. Ji Chunyan's beautiful eyes flickered. There was an extremely slight worry in the depths of her eyes. It wasn't just the people in the square. Even the 10+ heavenly immortal realm experts that sat cross-legged on the meditation cushions revealed strange expressions. Especially Shiji. His brows knit together slightly, and he intended to make a move to rescue Zhuowen. However, he was stopped by Do Hua. Brother Shi, do you still want to interfere in this battle of the gods? Do Hua said with a slightly cold gaze. Shiji's eyes flickered. He glanced at the celestial pool and revealed a pondering expression. He did not make a move. Naturally, Shiji was not afraid of Do Hua, but he believed in Zhuowen. He knew that since Zhuowen had reached the 77th breath, it would not be so easy for him to be injured by the pressure. Moreover, he faintly knew the specific reason why Zhuowen had paused. At this moment, amidst the countless pressures, Zhuowen was doing his best to activate his perfection saint physique. In the sea of consciousness between his eyebrows, Cheng Huang was excitedly spinning around the Fushi cauldron. It let out an extremely lascivious laugh. Haha, the Fushi cauldron has recovered quite a bit. Zhuowen gritted his teeth as he stared at Cheng Huang, who was still laughing loudly, and said with extreme displeasure. Bastard, I was caught up in this terrifying pressure because of you, and you actually still have the mood to laugh there. At this moment, Cheng Huang also came back to its senses. It had also noticed the terrifying pressure around Zhuowen. Then a strange look appeared in its eyes. Am I too lucky? The Fushi cauldron had just been repaired quite a bit, and I actually encountered the pressure of the celestial pool. This, hee hee. Cheng Huang laughed again when he spoke up to this point, and he was even more lustful than before. Cheng Huang's laughter made Zhuowen grit his teeth. He almost could not help but curse out loud. However, he forcibly suppressed it and said in a deep voice, "Why aren't you coming to help me?" Cheng Huang chuckled and said, "It's just some pressure." As it spoke, Cheng Huang patted the Fushi cauldron with its small paw. Then, Zhuowen felt a suction force surge out from the Fushi cauldron. Then this suction force attached to the surface of his body. In an instant, the surrounding terrifying pressure was completely absorbed by this strange suction force. Moreover, this suction force was extremely powerful. In a short while, it had completely absorbed the tide-like pressure around Zhuowen. This Fushi cauldron can actually absorb pressure? Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he said in a deep voice. Cheng Huang said in an old and experienced manner, "Of course. Due to the stone of origin, the Fushi cauldron has recovered quite a bit. A mere pressure is naturally not a problem for the Fushi cauldron, which has shocked both the past and present. Moreover," at this point, Cheng Huang's gaze suddenly fell on the illusory figures in the center of the celestial pool. A hint of obscure greed flashed in its eyes as it said, "The Fushi cauldron can even absorb the aura left behind by the ancient powerhouses in the celestial pool. Help me enter the center of the celestial pool." Zhuowen's pupils constricted. He stared at Cheng Huang and said, "Are you crazy? That place is too terrifying. If I enter, I won't be able to last a single breath before my body collapses and I die." Cheng Huang waved its hand and said, "Don't worry about that. Now that the Fushi cauldron has recovered quite a bit, the pressure in the celestial pool can't do anything to you. Go ahead." Zhuowen's eyes flickered. When he recalled that the pressure had been easily absorbed by the Fushi cauldron, he gritted his teeth, stood up, and walked towards the center of the celestial pool. At this moment, the crowd, who had been absent-minded because Zhuowen had broken through the 77th breath of pressure, revealed strange expressions when they saw Zhuowen stand up again and slowly walk towards the center of the celestial pool. What is Zhuowen trying to do? Does he want to enter the center of the celestial pool? The crowd discussed animatedly. Dohua and the dozen or so heavenly immortal patriarchs sitting on the praying mats revealed strange expressions. Clearly, they did not understand Zhuowen's actions. The center of the celestial pool is the source of the pressure. The pressure there is enough to kill any earthly immortal. Even a heavenly immortal would find it difficult to withstand. Could it be that this kid wants to enter that place? Dohua's pupils constricted as he frowned. Chapter 1785. Lord of the Divine Tomb. Step by step, Zhuowen walked towards the center of the celestial pond. A terrifying pressure swept out from the surroundings, but the moment it got close to Zhuowen, it was all sucked in by the strange suction force on the surface of his body. When Zhuowen was about a dozen steps away from the center of the celestial pool, he was already very close to it. Zhuowen could even see shadows with terrifying auras sitting cross-legged in the center of the pool. These silhouettes were much more terrifying than the previous 77 silhouettes. When Zhuowen approached the center of the celestial pond, the 77 shadows that were originally sitting cross-legged in the air suddenly opened their eyes. The 77 pairs of cold eyes stared fixedly at Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He could clearly feel that these 77 pairs of eyes were filled with extreme hostility. It was as if they would all attack together if Zhuowen took another step forward. Don't worry about these tiny shadows. They're just projections of the experts who soaked in the celestial pool back then. If they were their true bodies, you would have run away. But since they're just projections, I'll devour them all. Now that the Fushi cauldron has been repaired by the stone of origin, it's regained some of its former glory. You don't have to be afraid. Just enter the center of the celestial pool. Cheng Huang said domineeringly. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with suspicion. He summoned Xiaohe and after receiving Xiaohe's confirmation, he continued to step forward. Whoosh! Whoosh! The instant Zhuowen took a step forward, the 77 phantoms that sat cross-legged above the celestial pool suddenly whistled, and actually flew towards Zhuowen in unison. In an instant, the entire celestial pool boiled. Celestial chi soared into the sky and began to form a terrifying spiral storm. The storm wriggled and turned into a giant dragon that was nearly 10,000 feet long. The celestial pool shook violently, and the pressure around it reached an extremely shocking level. The pressure spread out and even spread outside the celestial pool. The other cultivators who were outside the celestial pool all revealed looks of fear when they felt this terrifying pressure. This pressure was too terrifying, so terrifying that they couldn't even muster up any resistance. Some of the cultivators who were at the heaven-defying saint stage were caught off guard and had the pressure invade their bodies, causing them to explode into a bloody mist. In an instant, all the cultivators in the square retreated until they were tens of thousands of feet away from the celestial pool. Only at this position could the pressure not affect them too much. The 77 shadows from before have all moved. That is to say, the 77 pressures from before have overlapped at this moment. What did he do? Pan Fei had no choice but to retreat as well. He looked at the celestial pool that was formed by countless celestial qi in shock. It wasn't just Pan Fei. Ji Chenyan, Kong Haogan, and the others were also shocked. Even they didn't expect such a thing to happen. The 77 phantoms were extremely fast. In an instant, they had arrived above Zhuo. They had actually used their own methods. Using their pressure as a medium, they bombarded the space above Zhuo's head in an attempt to completely crush him to death. Zhuo's heart was pounding. The pressure was too terrifying. It was the 77 shadows from before that had attacked together. In other words, 77 pressures overlapped at the same time. Zhuo didn't have any confidence that he could withstand such a terrifying pressure. However, he didn't have time to think because the pressure had completely enveloped him. Zhuo only felt that his body was being violently squeezed, as if all the bones in his body were about to be crushed. Absorb for me. Within Zhuo's sea of consciousness, Cheng Huang's little claw slapped the Fushi cauldron. Instantly, a whirlpool that resembled a storm suddenly shot out from between Zhuo's brows. Instantly, the surrounding pressure was sucked into the whirlpool. As the suction speed increased, Zhuo's body became lighter. The terrifying pressure from before receded like the tide. Zhuo, enter the center of the celestial pool. Cheng Huang shouted. Zhuo nodded, and then he instantly flashed into the central area like a vigorous monkey. At the same time, the enormous dragons formed from countless strands of immortal energy flashed over explosively as well. But they were still a step slower than Zhuo. When Zhuo completely entered the center of the celestial pool, the giant dragon only lingered outside for a while before it roared and suddenly exploded, turning into countless strands of celestial qi that entered the celestial pool once again. On the other hand, the 77 phantoms looked at each other. In the end, they all rushed into the celestial pool area, and actually took the initiative to chase after Zhuo. He actually entered the center of the celestial pool? What is he trying to do by entering that place? Everyone in the square was surprised. They looked into the distance, but they could not see anything in the center of the celestial pool. Because the center of the celestial pool was shrouded by shadows, they could not see what was inside. Even their divine consciousness could not enter to investigate. Do Hua and the dozen or so ancestors on the praying mats also frowned. Even they couldn't extend their divine senses into the central part. Only Shiji's eyes shone brightly. Earlier, he had sensed an extremely familiar aura from the suction force on Zhuo's body. He had once sensed this aura from an all-powerful figure 10,000 years ago. The great Nether Saint Dragon did not lie to me. That thing is indeed on Zhuo. In other words, is he really the child of destiny chosen by Lord Songjie? Shiji said with a complicated gaze. While Shiji was lost in thought, in the depths of the central plains far below the Chaos Divine Temple, there was a rather large world. There were all sorts of strange-looking coffins in this world. This was one of the 6 perilous places of the central region, the Serene Corpse Impasse. In the center of the Serene Corpse Impasse, there was a huge plateau. On this plateau, there were 5 towering tombstones. The tombstone in the center was extremely majestic. At the 4 corners of the central tombstone, there were similarly huge tombstones, but they were slightly smaller than the central tombstone. This was the place where Zhuowen accidentally entered the Serene Corpse impasse. At this moment, the central tombstone in the Serene Corpse impasse suddenly began to tremble. From the central tombstone, a faint nostalgic voice sounded. The aura of the Fushi cauldron. This time, the aura of the Fushi cauldron is much stronger than before. Is the new child of destiny really born? Behind the tombstones at the four corners of the Serene Corpse impasse, four huge coffins slowly floated. Among them, a faint voice sounded from the coffin in the east. This aura is very familiar. If I'm not wrong, it should be the little fellow who accidentally entered our place. The coffin in the south also said indifferently, "Do you still need to guess? Didn't you attack him because you sensed the aura of the Fushi cauldron on him? You clearly wanted to attack him, but you even accused him of blasphemy. How vile." The coffin in the east sounded rather helpless. This is the Lord's intention. Otherwise, do you think I have nothing better to do? And what's interesting is that the Tsang Dragon fellow also chose him. Back then, I was slightly interested in him, so it's fine for me to test him, right? You call that testing? You were planning to take his life, weren't you? A rather clear and cold voice sounded from the coffin in the north. The coffin in the east immediately said awkwardly, "Actually, this was the Lord's intention. He was the one who wanted me to chase him to death and beat him to death. Didn't you see that in the end, that guy in the Tsang Dragon Hall was forced out? And if I'm not wrong, that guy should be..." Before the coffin in the east could finish, a solemn and cold snort suddenly sounded from the central Serene Corpse impasse, causing the coffin in the east to shut up, not daring to speak again. "Lord." The four coffins all said respectfully. They respected the Lord of the Serene Corpse impasse from the bottom of their hearts. If it weren't for the Lord of the Serene Corpse impasse, the four of them wouldn't have been able to survive until now. Moreover, the formation of the Serene Corpse impasse was inseparably closely related to the Serene Corpse impasse. The Fushi cauldron has appeared and the Child of Destiny has descended. However, the Child of Destiny's cultivation is too low. After the primordial battlefield fuses together this time, the four of you must be well prepared. You must not let anything happen to the Child of Destiny. The Lord of the Serene Corpse impasse said indifferently. "Yes," the four coffins said in unison. The coffin in the east said with a flattering smile, "Lord, you've always said that the appearance of the primordial battlefield will cause another disaster. Is this a joke?" The other three coffins also fell into silence. Obviously, they were also quite curious about the Lord of the Serene Corpse impasse's words. The Lord of the Serene Corpse impasse was silent for a long time before he finally said slowly, "I'm not joking. A catastrophe will descend again. This is the prophecy left by Lord Songjia. In that case, can we stop the primordial battlefield from opening up?" The coffin in the east asked in a deep voice. "If it's a blessing, it's not a disaster. If it's a disaster, we can't avoid it. We can't stop the opening of the primordial battlefield this time. Even if we take action, the disaster will still come. Moreover, it will deviate from Lord Songjia's prophecy. At that time, there will be more variables," the Lord of the Serene Corpse impasse said indifferently. The four coffins were silent for a moment before they all said in unison, "We'll follow Lord's instructions in the primordial battlefield this time. The Child of Destiny is the key. We must protect him well. What we need to do now is wait. Wait for the primordial battlefield to open up," the Lord of the Serene Corpse impasse said. The moment Zhuowen stepped into the center of the celestial pool, he looked around and found that the surroundings were filled with dense shadows. These shadows were the projections left behind by the experts in the past. They were full of terrifying aura and pressure. Swoosh! Swoosh! The moment Zhuowen entered this place, these shadows opened their eyes one after another. Their eyes were full of hostility and indifference. Chapter 1786. Celestial Pool collapsed. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. This place was at the center of the celestial pool, and there was a powerful ancient restriction that had existed since ancient times. Divine sense could not enter at all, so Zhuowen did not have any scruples here. Zhuowen tapped his forehead with his right hand. Immediately, the Fushi cauldron in his sea of consciousness was taken out by Zhuowen. At this moment, the surface of the Fushi cauldron flickered with an ink-black light. The originally damaged body of the cauldron was now much more complete than before. The aura of the cauldron was much stronger than before. Above the Fushi cauldron, Cheng Huang stood on the divine turtle and slowly floated. At this moment, Cheng Huang's eyes were rather solemn. It formed a seal with its little claws, and immediately, the Fushi cauldron floated in the air and emitted a rather ear-piercing buzzing sound. Then the He Tu and the Luo inscription appeared inside the Fushi cauldron and instantly enveloped Zhuowen, forming an extremely powerful defense. The moment the He Tu and the Luo inscription enveloped Zhuowen, the 77 phantoms had already arrived. Then each of them used a powerful move to attack the He Tu and the Luo inscription. For a moment, there were continuous crackling sounds, but they were unable to break through the He Tu and the Luo inscription's defense. The He Tu and the Luo inscription's defense is so strong. It's much stronger than before. Zhuowen, who was within the He Tu and the Luo inscription's defense, revealed a wisp of surprise in his eyes. The superimposed pressure of the 77 phantoms was extremely terrifying. Even a peak earthly immortal would be injured or killed under such superimposed pressure. However, the He Tu and the inscription of the Luo easily blocked it. It was indeed a treasure refined by Zhangjia in the past. The He Tu and the inscription of the Luo were already extraordinary. Buzz. Suddenly, the Fushi cauldron in the air emitted a violent buzzing sound. Then, the countless dense runes on the cauldron began to emit dazzling light. Then, the runes left the cauldron and formed a huge vortex at the mouth of the cauldron. The shape of the vortex was like the bloody mouth of a beast, and it produced an indescribably terrifying suction force. The moment the suction force was generated, 5 of the 77 phantoms that were flying over were immediately sucked into the vortex that looked like a bloody mouth. The other phantoms that were attacking He Tu and Luo Shu naturally saw this scene as well. Their originally expressionless faces were now filled with fear, as they retreated one after another. They felt an extremely strong sense of threat from the Fushi cauldron. It was as if the Fushi cauldron before them was their nemesis and natural enemy. Aha! It's too late to leave now. Cheng Huang licked its lips and let out a long howl. With a wave of its little claws, the vortex at the mouth of the cauldron began to expand, instantly sealing off the escape routes of the remaining 72 phantoms. Caught off guard, more than a dozen phantoms directly hit the edge of the vortex in the process of retreating, and then were completely sucked into the vortex by the powerful suction force. The terror of the remaining phantoms grew even denser. Even though they were only projections left behind by experts of the ancient times and didn't possess any intelligence, the Fushi cauldron possessed an extremely strong restraint towards them, so they instinctively revealed terrified expressions and intended to flee from the cauldron. Unfortunately, these phantoms were enveloped by the vortex, so no matter where they fled, they would be sucked in by the vortex. As this continued, the number of phantoms was slowly decreasing while the aura of the Fushi cauldron was ceaselessly increasing. When the last phantoms were absorbed by the Fushi cauldron, Zhuowen acutely noticed that the originally simple and unadorned Fushi cauldron actually faintly revealed a terrifying pressure that caused even him to shudder with fear. The Fushi cauldron has finally started to possess a trace of the style it possessed all those years ago. Kid, the Fushi cauldron has already unlocked a new ability now, and this ability is similar to your Dao insight. Xiao He had actually flashed onto his shoulder without him noticing, and its little eyes narrowed as it revealed a rare smile of excitement. What ability? Zhuowen asked with slight interest. You'll know very soon. Xiao He feigned a mysterious smile and kept him in suspense. At the same time, Cheng Huang had already brought the Fushi cauldron into the He Tu and Luo Shu and arrived before Zhuowen. Take out your 5-bird seal, Xiao He said with a smile. Even though Zhuowen was puzzled as to why Xiao He was keeping him in suspense, he still obediently withdrew the 5-bird seal from his spirit ring. Place it into the Fushi cauldron. Xiao He continued. Zhuowen still did as he was told. After around 10 breaths of time, the instant Zhuowen withdrew the 5-bird seal once more, he noticed that the surface of the 5-bird seal was actually filled with an extremely terrifying pressure. Even though this pressure was much weaker than the Fushi cauldron at this moment, It was extremely fierce. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes shone brightly. Without needing Xiaohei's reminder, he immediately activated the 5-bird seal's attack. Following that, the azure chi within the 5-bird seal churned and transformed into phantoms of a tiger, a deer, a bear, an ape, and a bird. Moreover, these phantoms all carried extremely terrifying pressure. This pressure was so terrifying that even Zhuowen felt his heart skip a beat. Imbue pressure? Zhuowen's eyes lit up as he asked in a deep voice. Ah, yes, the Fuxi cauldron can indeed imbue a saint artifact with pressure. Furthermore, the longer you're in the Fuxi cauldron, the stronger the pressure will become. However, this pressure is only temporary and will dissipate very quickly. Thus, normally, the Fuxi cauldron imbues you with pressure during battle, Xiaohei said with a smile. Zhuowen nodded. He finally understood why Cheng Huang was so eager to enter the center of the celestial pond. It was because the center of the celestial pond was the source of the celestial pond's pressure. One could absorb the most pressure there. The pressure in the celestial pool is extremely precious and powerful. The Fuxi cauldron has just recovered quite well, so this pressure is perfect for an appetizer, Cheng Huang chuckled. With a wave of its little claw, it shot out once more with the Fuxi cauldron. It actually headed straight for the surrounding phantoms. These phantoms were even more terrifying than the previous 77 phantoms. However, they were extremely fearful of the Fuxi cauldron. While the Fuxi cauldron was absorbing the 77 phantoms, these powerful phantoms did not dare to make a move. Absorb. Cheng Huang chuckled and approached the nearest phantoms. The whirlpool suddenly surged and turned into a gaping mouth, swallowing the phantoms whole. This phantoms had the appearance of an old man. His eyes were as bright as the stars. However, the moment he sensed the aura from the Fuxi cauldron, his pupils shrank and he instinctively retreated. Unfortunately, the suction force was far beyond his imagination. Not long after he retreated, he was swallowed whole by the gaping mouth. The phantoms here were all extraordinary. Unfortunately, the Fuxi cauldron seemed to be a natural counter to these phantoms. No matter how terrifying the phantoms were, they were all devoured by the Fuxi cauldron without exception. Zhuowen watched for a while and lost interest. He could see that the Fuxi cauldron was simply crushing the surrounding phantoms. Although there were many phantoms in the surroundings, he knew that with the Fuxi cauldron's devouring speed, it would probably only take a few days to completely devour all the phantoms here. Zhuowen slowly sat cross-legged at the center of the celestial pool. The celestial qi here was denser than outside. Zhuowen had just broken through to the intermediate earthly immortal realm, so he could make use of the celestial qi here to consolidate his current cultivation. While Zhuowen was immersed in the center of the celestial pool, the outside world was in an uproar and the square was in a heated discussion. This was because after Zhuowen entered the center of the celestial pool, he had become completely silent and did not move at all. This made everyone suspicious. Time passed slowly and 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. During these 3 days, everyone was waiting for Zhuowen to appear. However, as time passed, they gradually became impatient. I'm afraid this kid has already died in there. Is there a need for us to wait? Let's go straight to the 3rd stage, He said coldly. Jiangzhe, who was not far away, nodded repeatedly and said, Brother, he is right. The pressure at the center of the celestial pool is terrifying. This kid will definitely die if he enters it. Waiting for 3 days is simply a waste of time. The others were also in a heated discussion. Most of them agreed with Hiyu and Jiangzhe's point of view. 3 days ago, the pressure from the 77 phantoms above the celestial pool was enough to kill most of them, let alone the pressure at the center of the pool. Do Hua frowned slightly and looked deeply at the center of the celestial pool. Even with his powerful cultivation, his divine consciousness was still unable to enter the center of the celestial pool to check on Zhuowen's situation. Moreover, waiting was not a solution. If it were not for Shiji, he would not have waited for 3 days. Suddenly, the originally quiet celestial pool shook violently. Then, a terrifying storm surged in the center of the celestial pool. The storm soared up into the sky, connecting the heavens and the earth. A terrifying pressure radiated in all directions, spreading all around the celestial pond. Invisible waves of air spread out and caused the surrounding square to shake violently. Countless cracks appeared on the ground. Many warriors turned pale and could not help but retreat. That's Zhuan? Suddenly, a figure slowly walked out from the center of the terrifying storm. With every step he took, the pressure in the celestial pool boiled and swept out. Immortal qi surged and turned into countless pillars of qi. Step by step, the figure quickly arrived at the edge of the celestial pool. At this moment, the entire celestial pool was boiling. Water surged into the sky and huge waves surged. It was terrifying. When the figure finally arrived at the edge of the celestial pool, cracking sounds came from the celestial pool behind him. Then, cracks began to appear in the center of the celestial pool. These cracks became more and more concentrated. Moreover, the celestial pool shook violently. In the end, the entire celestial pool began to collapse. Bang! 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 After the celestial pond collapsed, the pressure from the celestial pond disappeared without a trace, like a reflection of the moon in the water. Chapter 1787. The third stage. Ruin walked out step by step and landed on the square from the edge of the pool. The moment he landed on the square, everyone in the square instinctively retreated. Their eyes bulged as they stared at Zhuan in disbelief. After a moment of silence, a frenzy of discussion broke out. Zhuan's actions had truly exceeded everyone's expectations. No one had expected him to last 77 breaths in the pool. However, at the very end, Zhuan entered the center of the celestial pond like a moth darting into a flame. Originally, everyone thought that Zhuan would definitely die this time. Who would have thought that Zhuan would step out of the celestial pond with an unparalleled might? Moreover, the moment he stepped out of the celestial pond, the entire celestial pond actually collapsed. What exactly did he do in the center of the pool? That was the question in everyone's mind. Swoosh! Dohua stared solemnly at the collapsing pool. Then he waved his sleeve and surging celestial energy surged out. It formed a bowl-shaped cover and completely enveloped the collapsing pool. At the same time, Old Gu arrived beside Dohua. He formed a seal with his right hand and moved his fingers back and forth. Terrifying sealing power covered the surface of the pool. After being repaired by Dohua and Old Gu, the celestial pool, which was originally in a state of collapse, was now completely stabilized. However, the pressure above the celestial pool had become very little, or rather, almost non-existent. Dohua's expression was very ugly. He stared straight at Zhuan and said, "What exactly did you do in there?" Zhuan's gaze was calm. He said, "Divine Master, I only cultivated in there for 3 days. When I came out, the pool had become like this. I don't know the exact reason." Dohua narrowed his eyes. Just as he was about to continue asking, Shiji arrived before Zhuan. "Brother Do, this pool has existed for far too long. It wasn't very stable in the first place. Now that too much celestial qi has been absorbed, it's expected that it would collapse. You can't blame Zhuan for this," Shiji said indifferently. Dohua's expression froze as he looked deeply at Shiji. After a moment of silence, he sighed softly, "Perhaps." As he spoke, Dohua waved his sleeve and stored the temporarily stabilized celestial pool into his spirit ring. Fortunately, although the celestial pond was in a state of collapse, the immortal qi inside was not too damaged. When he returned, he could use his great divine ability to completely stop the collapse of the celestial pond, but the price would be higher. "Sir Divine Master, if this celestial pond collapsed because of me, Zhuan, then feel free to punish me. I, Zhuan, will not object." Zhuan cupped his fists and said sincerely. Seeing Zhuan's sincere attitude, Dohua's expression softened. He waved his hand and said, "Perhaps what Brother Shi said is true. This celestial pond has existed for too long. It is only a matter of time before it collapses." As he spoke, Dohua looked at Shiji and said, "Brother Shi, let's go back. The third test will be carried out in a while." Shiji nodded and didn't say anything before flashing back onto the meditation cushion. On the other hand, Dohua's gaze was bitter because Shiji's style of doing things really gave him a headache, yet he just happened to not dare rashly touch Shiji. At this moment, Over 10 heavenly immortal realm experts on the meditation cushions were staring at Zhuowen with surprise. Obviously, they'd never expected that this kid would actually be able to cause such a great commotion within the celestial pond. Moreover, these heavenly immortal realm experts were discerning people. They acutely noticed that at the instant Zhuowen walked out from the celestial pond, the celestial pond that was originally filled with a terrifying pressure had instantly vanished completely like a receding tide. They knew that the disappearance of this pressure was surely related to Zhuowen, but how did this kid accomplish it? Within the entrance of the central divine palace, Yuan Hongwen's brows were slightly knit together. For the first time, his gaze revealed a strange expression, and all of this was because of Zhuowen. Zhuowen's numerous performances had caused his speculations to fail, and this caused a trace of surprise to arise in Yuan Hongwen's heart. This kid is rather interesting. Yuan Hongwen spoke with deep meaning. The pupils of Hao Bo, who stood by Yuan Hongwen's side, constricted slightly. He was very clear that anyone who could make Yuan Hongwen say such words was basically treated as an opponent by Yuan Hongwen. Since Yuan Hongwen became famous, there were truly too few cultivators who could make him say such words. Even if there were, they were basically experts of the older generation, and there were basically no people of the same generation. Even Ji Chunyan wasn't treated as an opponent by Yuan Hongwen. But now Zhuowen, who didn't look very old, actually made Yuan Hongwen say such words. It was obvious that Yuan Hongwen really saw Zhuowen as an opponent. Next up is the third stage, the heaven stage. Do Hua swept to the top of the central divine palace, and immediately rolled up his sleeves. Suddenly, the surface of the ancient boulder, which originally fell in the middle of the square, burst into a blazing light, and an invisible wave of air swept out in all directions. Zhuowen sensed a boundless sense of vicissitudes and antiquity within the wave of air. Clearly, this ordinary-looking boulder had existed for far, far too long. I've said it before. This ancient boulder is a meteorite that fell from outer space. It possesses supreme power, and contains a wondrous power. If someone can comprehend this wondrous power from within the boulder, it will greatly benefit their future cultivation, Do Hua said calmly. You have to comprehend this ancient boulder for 10 breaths. If you can make the holes on the surface of the boulder reveal white light, you will be considered to have passed. Of course, the more white light there is, the deeper your comprehension, and naturally, the better your result. Speaking of this, Do Hua said to Yang Yi, Yang Yi, you will be in charge of this round. Yang Yi clasped his fist and immediately commanded the green qilin to descend on the ancient boulder. He pointed at a person at random and said, You go first. The person's eyes were solemn. His cultivation was probably at the peak of the heaven-defying saint realm. He slowly came before the ancient boulder and Yang Yi continued, Open your mind and put your hand on it. The person nodded and took a deep breath. Immediately, his right hand was placed on the ancient boulder. 10 breaths passed in the blink of an eye, but the ancient boulder did not have any reaction. It was lifeless. The person opened his eyes and could not help but take a few steps back. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with disappointment. He did not comprehend anything from the boulder at all. This caused a trace of doubt and unwillingness to accept this result. However, Yang Yi did not care whether the person was willing to accept this result or not. He said indifferently, Failed. Next. Yang Yi pointed at 7 or 8 people in a row. Unfortunately, these people, like the first person, did not comprehend anything from the ancient boulder, and were directly eliminated. Such a high elimination rate immediately caused the atmosphere in the square to become much more solemn. Everyone began to worry. Fortunately, the elimination stopped at the 9th person. This person looked like a young man in his mid-20s, and his cultivation was around the half-immortal realm. When the person walked in front of the ancient boulder and placed his right hand on it for 9 breaths, the ancient boulder finally reacted. The holes on its surface lit up with a faint white light. Moreover, this white light only appeared within 1/10 of the ancient boulder. If one did not observe carefully, it would be difficult to notice. Yang Yi glanced at the person and said indifferently, Passed. The person opened his eyes, and his eyes were filled with surprise. After clasping his fist at Yang Yi, he slowly stepped back. With this person's success as a precedent, the solemn atmosphere in the square was immediately broken. Many people were filled with confidence. Surprise appeared in Zhuowen's eyes. When the white light appeared on the ancient boulder, the power of Tao Will that had always existed in his sea of consciousness was like a wild horse that had escaped its reins. It was abnormally excited, as if it wanted to leave his body. This discovery caused Zhuowen's eyes to narrow. He stared at the ancient boulder and revealed a contemplative expression. He was very clear that since the power of Tao Will had such a great reaction, there was most likely a power similar to Tao Will within the ancient boulder. Or it could be said that there was a way to improve Tao Will. When he thought of this, Zhuowen's eyes suddenly became much more fervent. Following that, most of the people that Yang Yi pointed out were able to light up the ancient boulder with a white glow, successfully passing the test. However, most of these people who passed only managed to light up the hole on the surface of the ancient boulder between the 9th and 10th breaths. Moreover, after lighting up the surface of the ancient boulder, these cultivators revealed excited expressions. It was obvious that they had obtained quite a lot of benefits from the ancient boulder. Suddenly, Hiyu, who was not far away, was pointed out by Yang Yi, and it attracted the attention of the surrounding people. After all, Hiyu was the representative of the Wang Ren clan's group, and he was also a late-stage Earth immortal. An existence like this would probably be able to quickly light up the ancient boulder and obtain even more benefits from it. Enjoying the gazes of the crowd, Hiyu revealed a proud expression. He casually glanced at Zhuowen, but he discovered that Zhuowen was only in deep thought and did not pay attention to him at all. This caused Hiyu's face to instantly darken. With a cold snort, Hiyu slowly flew to the top of the ancient boulder. Then he placed his right hand on the surface of the ancient boulder. On the dozen praying mats, Wuxiang revealed a look of anticipation. The ancient boulder was famous during the ancient times. It was said that there was a chance to touch upon Tao Will within it. If Hiyu's luck was good, he might be able to comprehend Tao Will. When he thought of Tao Will, Wuxiang and the dozen heavenly immortal ancestors on the praying mats revealed envious expressions. Tao insight was illusory and indistinct, and even all of them had yet to comprehend it. Moreover, they'd never heard of or seen it in the entire Central Plains, and they only knew that Tao insight possessed an extremely obvious effect towards the improvement of one's strength. Chapter 1788. 3 Breaths. Since there had never been a genius who comprehended Tao intent in the Middle Continent, no one noticed when Zhuowen used Tao intent to increase his speed and amplify his immortal technique. Of course, this was also related to the fact that Zhuowen didn't intentionally reveal Tao intent. This ancient boulder is said to be related to Tao intent. Hiyu's talent is pretty good, so he might be able to comprehend Tao intent by chance, Wei Wuyin of the Beast Envoy clan said with a smile. That might not be the case. Tao intent is too ethereal. It's not like we haven't tried before, but we weren't able to comprehend Tao intent. I'm afraid Hiyu isn't qualified, Dong Fangxin of the Heavy Shield clan said coldly. Wuxiang frowned. He stared at Dong Fangxin and said indifferently, I'm afraid Dong Qixin of your Heavy Shield clan isn't any better, right? Dong Fangxin grinned and said, I didn't say that kid, Qi Xian, would be able to comprehend Tao insight. This thing is too illusory, and it's up to him to comprehend as much as he can from the ancient boulder. I never exaggerate. Wuxiang's gaze was cold, but he didn't say anything else. He knew Dong Fangxin's character very well. He was a wily old fox, so he didn't want to argue with him. Hiyu came before the ancient boulder. His eyes were filled with confidence. His right hand landed on the surface of the ancient boulder, and he quickly entered a profound state. On the 7th breath, 1/3 of the ancient boulder was completely lit up. Moreover, it was much brighter than the previous few people. Hiyu slowly opened his eyes and frowned. Obviously, he wasn't very satisfied with his result. 7 breaths. Pass. Yang Yi said indifferently. Hiyu was unwilling, but he couldn't do anything about it. He could only give up. When the crowd saw Hiyu's result, although many of them were envious, there were also many who were doubtful. Hiyu was the representative of the Wang Ren clan after all. His strength could be considered one of the peak experts in this divine battle. However, he only managed to light up the ancient boulder on the seventh breath. There wasn't much difference between this and those who lit up the ancient boulder at the eighth breath. Moreover, some of those martial artists who lit up the boulder at the eighth breath were half immortals. The gap between them and Hiyu wasn't small. Hiyu clearly saw the questioning looks in the eyes of some people. His face was somewhat gloomy, but he did not say a word. However, he sneered in his heart. After the enlightenment just now, he was very clear that it wasn't that easy to light up the ancient boulder. Most likely, the results of the other representatives of the Saint Rune clans wouldn't be much better than his. After Hiyu, it was Wei Rui's turn. Wei Rui's result was better than Hiyu's. He actually lit up the ancient boulder on the sixth breath. Moreover, the ancient boulder was brighter than Hiyu's, and the range was also wider. When Wei Rui's results came out, it caused an uproar in the square. Clearly, Wei Rui's results were quite good. Wei Rui slightly raised his chin and glanced at Hiyu, who wasn't far away. Then he returned to his group. As for Hiyu, he clenched his fists, and his gaze turned gloomy. However, Hiyu still felt lucky. He looked at Zhuowen, who wasn't far away, and coldly snorted in his heart. I'm afraid that Zhuowen will spend more time on the ancient boulder than me. Next was Situ Ninyue of the Spiral Thorn clan, Jiangzhe of the Icefire clan, Dong Qixin of the Heavy Shield clan, and Kong Haoqian of the Blood Sacrifice clan. Situ Ninyue and Jiangzhe also lit up the ancient boulder on the sixth breath. Dong Qixin and Kong Haoqian went one step further. They actually lit up the ancient boulder on the fifth breath. Moreover, they lit up more than half of the area on the ancient boulder. At that moment, the entire square was in an uproar, and there was a lot of discussion. The ancestor of the Heavy Shield clan, Dong Fengxin, and the ancestor of the Blood Sacrifice clan, Kong Lianshuan, were naturally relieved. They revealed a rare smile on their faces. As for the ancestor of the Royal Blade clan, He Wushang, his expression was ugly, and he was extremely unhappy. After Kong Haoqian, a few more people were tested in succession. Then, Yang Yi pointed to the only two peak earthly immortal experts who participated in the divine battle, Pan Fei and Sherbin. Although Pan Fei's and Sherbin's cultivations were indeed the best among the crowd, their comprehension abilities were clearly not as strong as everyone had expected. The two of them only lit up the ancient boulder at the eighth breath. As for Pan Fei and Sherbin's unexpected results, it naturally caused a lot of commotion. However, considering that the two of them had cultivated for a long time, and had only reached the peak earthly immortal realm, it was obvious that their comprehension was only average. After Pan Fei and Sherbin finished their tests, Ji Chunyan of the Immortal Clan was called. Instantly, everyone in the square focused their attention on Ji Chunyan. Even Zhuowen raised his head and focused his attention on Ji Chunyan. Ji Chunyan had not cultivated for a long time, but her cultivation base had reached the middle stage of the earthly immortal realm. Her comprehension and talent could be said to be one of the best. In this test of the ancient boulder, her results would not be worse than Kong Haoqian and Dong Qixin's. She might even be better. Ji Chunyan was as graceful as a butterfly. Her jade-like feet lightly stepped on the ground, and she slowly landed in front of the ancient boulder. Then, she stretched out her jade-like hand and placed it on the surface of the boulder that was full of holes. At the third breath, the ancient boulder shook violently. Then a strange ripple spread out from the ancient boulder. The moment everyone in the square came into contact with the ripple, they were momentarily absent-minded. Their eyes were glazed over, and their pupils shrunk. It was as if they were hypnotized. When everyone came back to their senses, they were all shocked. The absent-mindedness just now was too terrifying. In that instant, if someone wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as flipping a hand. The only person in the square who was not affected by the ripple was Zhuowen. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He stared at Ji Chunyan's back as a look of contemplation appeared in his eyes. He wasn't unfamiliar with that ripple just now. It was the invisible ripple that had spread out the moment he came into contact with Dao Will. However, the ripple that Ji Chunyan had unleashed was much weaker than the one that Zhuowen had unleashed in the third heaven of the Azure Dragon Palace. After all, the ripples back then had enveloped the entire third world. Its range and influence were so great that even the first mountain god back then had to be cautious. The energy that exists in the ancient boulder is probably related to the Tao will. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and thought to himself. The moment the ripple spread out, 2/3 of the area around the ancient boulder was covered by the white light. At this moment, the white light that the ancient boulder was emitting was too dazzling. It made everyone squint their eyes. What a blazing white light! Miss Ji actually lit up the ancient boulder on the third breath. What terrifying comprehension! In an instant, the entire square was in an uproar. Voices of discussion were like a storm that came one after another in the square. It was like a raging storm that grew and multiplied endlessly. It was not only the people in the square. At this moment, the heavenly immortal patriarchs on the praying mats were shocked. Divine Master Douhua's eyes were filled with admiration. He knew very well that to be able to activate the ancient boulder on the third breath, her talent had already surpassed countless heroes. In the Chaos Temple, only Yuan Hongwen could surpass Ji Qinyan's result. Haha, Qinyan really didn't disappoint me. Sitting on one of the praying mats, Ji Wubbing stroked his beard and laughed. His eyes were filled with excitement. Even he did not expect Ji Qinyan to be able to light up the ancient boulder so quickly. Inside the hall, Yuan Hongwen nodded slightly. He admired Ji Qinyan for being able to light up the ancient boulder on the third breath. 3 breaths before the ancient boulder should be able to touch the Tao will. I'm afraid Miss Ji will gain a lot of benefits. However, it's too difficult to comprehend the Tao will. Beside Yuan Hongwen, Hao Bo sighed softly. After saying that, Hao Bo glanced at Yuan Hongwen. Back then, Yuan Hongwen had also tested himself on the ancient boulder. At that time, Yuan Hongwen had lit up the ancient boulder on the second breath. At that time, the invisible ripple produced by the ancient boulder was extremely terrifying. It was far more terrifying than Ji Qinyan's. Even so, Yuan Hongwen had not been able to comprehend the Tao will. He had only touched the level of the Tao will. He was very close, but there was still a gap. Yuan Hongwen's eyes flickered as he fell into deep thought. The moment the invisible ripple appeared on the ancient boulder, he could not help but think of the invisible ripple that had spread out from Zhuowen's body. The two gave him a similar feeling. Could that be the power of the Tao will? Yuan Hongwen laughed involuntarily. He thought that his idea was extremely laughable. The Tao will was illusory and unfathomable. Even if Yuan Hongwen relied on the ancient boulder, he still could not fully comprehend the Tao will. Zhuowen had never touched the ancient boulder. How could he possess the power of the Tao will? What a pity! There is only one chance to comprehend the ancient boulder. If there is a second chance, I might be able to fully comprehend the Tao will. At that time, Yuan Hongwen shook his head helplessly. Back then, he was only a hair's breadth away from the Tao will. However, he was unable to fully comprehend the essence of the Tao will, and thus missed the best opportunity. He was confident that if he could comprehend the power of the Tao will within the ancient boulder again, he would truly be able to fully comprehend the Tao will. However, it was already impossible. Everyone could only comprehend the Tao will once in their lifetime. After that, they would be rejected by the ancient boulder. At this moment, Ji Qinyan slowly opened her eyes. She took a few steps back with her jade-like feet. Her beautiful eyes were filled with ecstasy. Such ecstasy was rarely seen on a woman with a calm temperament like Ji Qinyan. However, she could not help but reveal such ecstasy. It was obvious that Ji Qinyan had obtained great benefits from the ancient boulder. Excellent. Yang Yi took a deep look at Ji Qinyan and said. Ji Qinyan had also calmed down. She cupped her fists at Yang Yi and retreated into the Eternity Family's group. Zhuowen, you try? Yang Yi pointed at Zhuowen and laughed. Swoosh. Swoosh. Chapter 1789. Tracing to the origin. Zhuowen stood there quietly like a spear. He stood tall and upright like an indomitable spirit. He slowly raised his head and stared at Yang Yi on the ancient boulder, nodded slightly, and then walked over step by step. As Zhuowen walked over, many of the nearby cultivators couldn't help but take a few steps back. Although Zhuowen didn't emit any imposing aura, and even looked like an ordinary youth, after his performance in the first 2 stages, Zhuowen had unknowingly established a terrifying and powerful image in the hearts of others. In the first stage, the host, Chen Su, died because of him. In the second stage, the celestial pond collapsed because of him. Then what about the third stage? This was the thought in everyone's heart. Everyone wanted to know if Zhuowen, who had a terrifying and outstanding performance in the first two stages, would be able to create the same supreme might in the third stage as he did in the first two stages. Even the gazes of the 10+ heavenly immortal realm ancestors in the sky, including Do Hua, started to converge as they paid attention to Zhuowen. They wanted to know what kind of result this little fellow, who had caused quite a stir in the first two stages, would obtain in the third stage. This Zhuowen's comprehension isn't bad, and isn't inferior to Chen Yan. He should be able to light up the ancient boulder in the third breath. Yuan Hongwen smiled lightly. How about it? With Zhuowen's performance in the first two stages, it was sufficient to attract his attention. Now he didn't dare look down on Zhuowen. In the square Yu's gaze flickered, and he sneered in his heart. He still held a kind of fluke, and this kind of fluke made him think that Zhuowen's result in the third stage would definitely be worse than his. Zhuowen stopped before the ancient boulder, and his gaze silently stared at the surface of the ancient boulder. There was a wisp of excitement in his heart. He knew that the energy of Tao insight should exist within this ancient boulder. Taking a deep breath, Zhuowen slowly stretched out his right hand, and then under the gazes of countless people, his hand landed on the surface of the ancient boulder. The instant Zhuowen placed his right hand on the ancient boulder, not even a breath's time had passed, the ancient boulder actually began to emit a terrifying white light. This white light was too blazing, and it practically enveloped the entire boulder. Then, the white light suddenly gathered together and soared into the sky, forming an extremely terrifying white pillar of light. At this moment, the entire square was deathly silent. Everyone stared blankly at the scene of the ancient boulder, and the terrifying white light that soared into the sky. They were all dumbstruck. He lit up the ancient boulder in a breath's time? Someone's mouth was wide open as he exclaimed in disbelief. Are you blind? It didn't even take a breath of time. I saw it very clearly. The moment Zhuowen placed his right hand on the ancient boulder, it lit up. He was completely stunned. He couldn't help but rub his eyes, subconsciously thinking that he had seen wrongly. But when he looked again, he bitterly realized that it wasn't an illusion, but reality. Ji Chenyan's beautiful eyes narrowed as she stared blankly at this scene. She was completely frozen on the spot. As for the other representatives of the Saint Talisman clans, their faces were either stiff, shocked, or dumbfounded. Their expressions were surprisingly similar. Kacha. Yuan Hongwen clenched his right hand as he stared at the terrifying white pillar that soared into the sky. At this moment, he didn't know how to describe his current feelings. The formless ripple that Ji Chenyan had caused in the ancient boulder also violently swept out from the ancient boulder. This ripple was simply too huge. It gathered layer by layer in the air, then spread out in all directions. In an instant, countless cracks began to appear on the ground of the square. Retreat! Everyone in the square felt that something was wrong and quickly retreated out of the square's range. Yang Yi, who was floating above the ancient boulder, narrowed his eyes. He urged the green qilin under his feet to leave a certain range of the ancient boulder. However, he smiled bitterly and said, "This little guy really knows how to cause trouble." As for Do Hua and the dozen heavenly immortal patriarchs in the sky, they used their own methods to resist the attack of the ripple that spread over, but their eyes were filled with bewilderment. This kid lit up the ancient boulder so quickly. His speed is even faster than Yuan Hongwen's. Doesn't that mean that it's possible for him to completely comprehend the Tao intent? Ji Wubbing of the Eternity clan said in shock. Do Hua frowned slightly but shook his head and said, "It's not that easy. The Tao intent is too illusory. Wanting to completely comprehend it isn't a matter of how high one's comprehension is, but it depends on one's luck." The other heavenly immortal patriarchs nodded in agreement. The dozen of them were able to cultivate to the heavenly immortal realm, so their comprehension was naturally not bad. It could even be said that they were very strong. However, they still couldn't comprehend the Tao intent back then. It was clear that it was too difficult to completely comprehend the Tao intent. Of course, Zhuowen lit up the ancient boulder too quickly. even faster than Yuan Hongwen. Perhaps his chances of comprehending the Tao intent were higher. Of course, when Zhuowen quickly lit up the ancient boulder, there were two people on the futon who were not in a good mood. These two people were naturally the patriarch of the Wangren clan, He Wuxiang, and the master of the lunar battlefield, Taiyin. If this kid comprehends the Tao intent, he must not be allowed to live. Master of Taiyin's gaze was gloomy as he thought to himself. While everyone was in an uproar, Zhuowen fell into a mysterious state. It was as if he had entered a mysterious place. There was only one mountain here, and there was only one Taoist temple on the mountain. There was also an old Taoist in the temple. This old Taoist held a bamboo scroll in his right hand, and his left hand was behind his waist. He stood in front of the Taoist temple and stared at the sunrise and sunset in the sky. He was chanting an extremely mysterious scripture. Tao may be Tao, but it is not the eternal Tao. Name may be a name, but it is not the eternal name. Nameless, the beginning of all things. Name, the mother of all things. Therefore, there is always no desire to see how wonderful it is. There is always desire to see how it is. Both of them come from the same place, but their names are the same. They are the most mysterious of mysteries, the gate of all wonders. The old Taoist chanted slowly. His face was calm from beginning to end. He slowly turned his head and looked at Zhuowen. He smiled and said, Tao gives birth to one, one gives birth to two, two gives birth to three, and three gives birth to all things. All things carry yin and embrace yang, rushing qi to achieve harmony. My young friend, have you understood Tao? Zhuowen's gaze turned cold. He had thought that this was just an illusion, but he did not expect this old Taoist to turn his head and look at him directly. It was as if he was not facing an illusion, but a real old Taoist. Tao. What is Tao? Zhuowen revealed a perplexed look. The old Taoist smiled. His gaze seemed to penetrate Zhuowen and see another world. He said, Buddha pays attention to the cycle of cause and effect. Tao, however, pays attention to the origin. My young friend, where is your cause, and where is your origin? If you know these, perhaps you can understand what Tao is. In this world, everything is Tao. A drop of dew may contain the boundless world. A leaf may contain love and hatred, and a drop of tear may contain countless tribulations of love. Tao is very complicated, but it is also very simple. As long as you don't lose your heart, everything will be fine. Then, my young friend, what is your heart, and where is your origin? Zhuowen's gaze became more and more confused. His gaze penetrated the old Taoist, passed through the Taoist temple, broke through the mountains, and entered the starry sky. At this moment, Zhuowen entered the mysterious state of exploring Tao. His gaze seemed to be extremely bright at this moment. It penetrated the boundless starry sky, searching for countless stars. Tracing to the origin? What is my origin? The confusion in Zhuowen's eyes grew more and more. At this moment, his consciousness was derived from his gaze. It was as if at this moment, Zhuowen's consciousness was limitless. It left the entire heavenly armor continent and entered the endless starry sky. He saw countless stars. Some of these stars were like the rising sun, full of vitality. Some were like the scorching sun in the middle of the sky, and some were like the desolate old man in the twilight of his life. Zhuowen even saw some planets that were on the verge of destruction. Those planets began their final evolution in their final years. Then, at the end of their evolution, they collapsed. The terrifying power generated was enough to annihilate all the living beings on the planet. Zhuowen's consciousness traveled for a very, very long time. He could no longer remember how long he had traveled through the boundless starry sky. He only knew that as he traveled, the confusion in his heart grew more and more intense. In the end, his consciousness stopped on a planet. Most of the planet was filled with blue. Zhuowen was very familiar with the blue. He knew that it was the ocean, the blue ocean. A small portion of the land was covered in brown and light green. Zhuowen knew that the brown and light green areas were the land. Countless life forms lived on this planet. Zhuowen was very familiar with the auras of these life forms because he had once been a part of this planet. Zhuowen's eyes began to shine brighter and brighter. The confusion in his eyes began to recede as well. His soul entered the vast planet, entering the tall buildings and bustling streets that were bustling with traffic. Finally, his consciousness stopped in front of a school. This school had a neat teaching building, a huge laboratory building, and a quiet and tranquil library. There were laughing classmates, friends, and lovers. A familiar aura rushed over. But Zhuo Wen's divine sense just watched all of this quietly, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He slowly withdrew his divine sense and left the school. He traversed more than half of the continent, and arrived at a seaside town. There were urbanized skyscrapers, dilapidated tiled houses, and normal houses. Zhuo Wen's consciousness stopped in the sky above an extremely ordinary house. In front of this house, there was a small courtyard. At this moment, in the courtyard, a somewhat stooped middle-aged man was drying fish. Not far from the middle-aged man, there was a wrinkled woman. Just like that, Zhuo Wen silently looked at this couple. For some reason, his heart actually throbbed with guilt. "Dad, Mom." The corner of Zhuo Wen's mouth revealed a bitter smile. He spat out these two names that he had not used for a long time with difficulty. His heart ached. Chapter 1790. 100 Soldiers. Zhuo Wen's expression changed slightly. He did not expect that there would be a divine sense in a place like this. Moreover, this divine sense was not weak at all. Which fellow Taoist dares to trespass into my Wuxia continent? The moment this divine sense swept over, an extremely unfriendly voice sounded out. As soon as this voice came out, that divine sense was like a sword, fiercely thrusting over. It was extremely impolite. Zhuo Wen narrowed his eyes and snorted coldly. His divine sense transformed into countless ropes and bound the sword-shaped divine sense layer by layer. Then, with a sudden squeeze, the sword-shaped divine sense directly collapsed. This divine sense was not very strong. It should be around the early stage of the Earth Immortal stage, but Zhuo Wen's cultivation had reached the middle stage of the Earth Immortal stage. Moreover, under the effect of his Tao intent, his divine sense was infinitely magnified. A mere early-stage Earth Immortal divine sense really could not affect him at all. What? The moment the sword-shaped divine sense shattered, the owner of the divine sense let out a muffled groan, and revealed a shocked and furious voice. The mortals below did not notice the collision of the two divine senses at all. However, the collision of the divine senses swept up an extremely terrifying gale in the sky. As soon as this gale came out, it caused many mortals below to involuntarily shiver and hurriedly enter their own houses. The couple in the small courtyard also felt this gust of cold wind. The two of them leaned against each other and entered the house. Zhuo Wen looked at the couple who had already entered the house with some reluctance. Then he sighed softly and his divine sense began to slowly dissipate. "I wonder when I will be able to return." A faint voice sounded in the air. In the end, Zhuo Wen's divine sense disappeared. The moment Zhuo Wen's divine sense disappeared, a long rainbow flew over from the horizon, and instantly arrived at the place where Zhuo Wen's divine sense was. This person was dressed in a white robe and looked to be in his 40s. He was standing on a flying sword. At this moment, his face was slightly pale and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He muttered to himself in fear. Who was the owner of that divine sense just now? He's actually so powerful and so unfamiliar. He's definitely not a cultivator from the Wuxia continent. Just who is he? This person racked his brains but had no clue at all. Moreover, he also knew that Zhuo Wen had already shown mercy in that exchange just now. If Zhuo Wen had really hardened his heart, he was afraid that he would have suffered more than just minor injuries. "Let's go back and report this to the sect leader." The person shook his head. With a stomp of his right foot, he instantly disappeared. The strange thing was that many of the mortals below didn't notice him at all. It was as if the middle-aged man was transparent. Zhuo Wen slowly opened his eyes. What appeared before him was still a mountain, a Taoist temple, and an old Taoist. At this moment, the old Taoist priest looked at Zhuo Wen with a smile and said, "Little friend, have you traced back to the origin?" Zhuo Wen looked deeply at the old Taoist priest in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" The old Taoist priest laughed and held the bamboo slip in his hand. He said with a smile, "It seems that you have traced back to the origin. It's really good that you can enter the threshold of Tao will." This kind of thing is illusory and 1 in a billion. You can really comprehend it, which shows that you're extraordinary. At this point, an invisible ripple spread throughout the entire space. Then, Zhuan was pushed back and flew out. Then he saw that the mountain and the Taoist temple were collapsing. In the Taoist temple, the old Taoist priest was still holding the bamboo slip. A green ox appeared under his feet. It rose into the air and slowly walked away. In Zhuan's eyes, the green ox was walking very slowly. However, every step it took was hundreds of millions of miles. It was as if the earth was shrinking into an inch. Ah, little friend, if there's a chance we'll meet again. Take this. It's my token. If you're lucky enough to reach the soul formation stage and obtain the astrolabe, you'll be able to travel through the starry sky. At that time, you can come to the summer region to find me. The old Taoist priest's laughter kept echoing in Zhuan's ears. Then, a ball of purple gas appeared in his hand. This ball of purple gas was only the size of a thumb. It was obviously in the form of mist, but when Zhuan touched it, it felt like a round bead. Riding a green ox out of seclusion. Zhuan rubbed the purple gas in his hand. His eyes became brighter and brighter. He suddenly thought of a character in the ancient legends of his previous life. This person was the founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu. Whoosh! The moment the mountain and the Taoist temple disappeared, the invisible ripple appeared again. If Zhuan were in the outside world now, he would be extremely shocked. At this moment, the surroundings of the ancient boulder Zhuan was on were practically filled with a terrifying white light. This white light was getting denser and denser, stronger and stronger. At the instant the white light was dense to the limit, it actually started to merge into a ball and started to ceaselessly wriggle. In the end, an enormous arched door appeared in the sky. This is the door of profundity? Do Hua's pupils constricted as he abruptly stood up and stared fixedly at the arched door in the sky. It wasn't only him. The 10+ heavenly immortal realm experts on the meditation mats were unable to sit still as well. They stood up one after another and stared dumbstruck at the arched door. Even though they'd never comprehended Tao insight, they'd read about it in the ancient books. The door of profundity would appear when one comprehended Tao insight. This door of profundity was extremely profound, and it was said that one would be able to comprehend Tao insight after stepping into this door. Shiji's eyes narrowed as he stared at the door of profundity in the sky with a complicated expression. It said that one would be able to comprehend Tao insight after stepping into the door of profundity. He Wuxiang's gaze burned as he stomped on the sky with his right foot, and he was actually the first to leap up and flash towards the door of profundity. It wasn't just He Wuxiang, the Beast Envoy clan's ancestor. Wei Wuyin pondered for a short moment before following closely behind He Wuxiang. Besides these two people, the gazes of the other heavenly immortal realm experts and master of the battlefield flickered, yet they didn't make any rash movements. Even though they coveted the Tao insight extremely, they were comparatively wiser, and were able to sense the formidable aura emitted from the door of profundity. He Wuxiang instantly flashed to arrive before the door of profundity, and the burning desire in his gaze had reached the limit. After that, he took a step forward with the intention of completely stepping into the door of profundity. Bang! But at the instant He Wuxiang took a step forward with his right foot, an extremely strong feeling of danger instantly surged into his heart. Within the door of profundity, countless white lights surged and converged before transforming into an enormous palm. The striations on the surface of this palm were clear and lifelike, and it was like the palm of a real person. Especially the aura that effused out from the palm was extremely vast and terrifying. At the instant this palm appeared, the feeling of danger in He Wuxiang's mind had already reached its peak, and then he shouted furiously as he instantly retreated explosively repeatedly, and he didn't dare approach the door of profundity. Unfortunately, this palm seemed as if it had locked onto him. Swoosh! It gave rise to boundless violent winds that instantly flashed explosively towards He Wuxiang, and its speed was so swift that it far exceeded He Wuxiang's expectations. Damn it! He Wuxiang shouted furiously as he flicked his sleeve. Instantly, countless weapon images flashed out explosively from his sleeve, and they suddenly blasted onto the palm. Unfortunately, this palm was too terrifying. At the instant the weapon images came into contact with the palm, They instantly collapsed, and it terrified He Wuxiang to the point of shuddering with fear. Wei Wuyin, who was originally following closely behind He Wuxiang, naturally saw this scene as well. Without even thinking about it, he immediately retreated, and he had no intention of helping He Wuxiang resist this palm. He Wuxiang naturally saw this scene as well, and he cursed inwardly, but there was nothing he could do. Although he had some friendship with Wei Wuyin, it was impossible for Wei Wuyin to help him at such a critical moment. The price to pay was simply too great. Blade, sword, spear. He Wuxiang clenched his teeth and formed a seal with his right hand. Instantly, 3 gusts of wind appeared around him. These gusts of wind contained the shadow of a blade, the shadow of a sword, and the shadow of a spear. The power they produced was terrifying. The 3 violent winds whistled as they fiercely blocked in front of He Wuxiang. The boundless sharp aura could pierce through the heavens and earth, and cause the sun and moon to dim in comparison. Unfortunately, the palm was only blocked by the 3 violent winds for a moment, and the surface of the palm emitted extremely dense, invisible ripples. This invisible ripple spread out, layer upon layer, and the surrounding space collapsed and collapsed because of it. The 3 storms, which were originally fierce and frightening, suddenly came to a halt when the invisible ripple spread over. Subsequently, they shattered like glass. He Wuxiang's heart shuddered as he watched, and he felt bitter in his heart. He did not expect the door of profundity to be so terrifying, and the giant palm that was formed from it was so strange. His attack was like tofu, and it did not hinder it at all. Swoosh! The giant palm swept out again like a hot knife through butter, and blasted in front of He Wuxiang. He Wuxiang no longer held back, and he took out a ball of black gas from his spiritual ring. This ball of black gas was surrounded by countless phantoms. If one looked carefully, these phantoms were mostly in the form of various weapons, and they looked extremely strange and terrifying. What was even more strange was that the aura within the black gas was extremely vast and terrifying. When everyone looked at it, they only felt their hearts beat faster, and their minds trembled. It could be said that this black gas was not simple. The heavenly immortal saint artifact of the Wang Run clan, 100 soldiers. Do Hua's eyes narrowed, and he revealed a trace of interest. It is said that this 100 soldiers was formed from the saint artifacts of the previous patriarchs of the Wang Run clan. It contains hundreds of weapon souls, and it can change the shape of the weapon at will. It can be considered as a supreme item among the earthly immortal saint artifacts. The other ancestors also discussed. Without a doubt, the heavenly immortal saint artifact, 100 soldiers, in He Wuxiang's hand, should be quite famous among the crowd. Otherwise, it would not be able to cause such a lively discussion. 100 soldier war soul. He Wuxiang roared angrily, and his right hand grabbed the black gas. Immediately, the black gas began to grow several feet long. On the surface, it looked like a rod, but it was not a rod, and it looked like a spear, but it was not a spear. Especially the phantoms around the 100 soldiers, as he grabbed them, they directly spread out. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.